Greetings, brave souls, and welcome to the shadowed corridors of Nocturnal Nightmares TV, where the rain doesn't just fall, it listens. Tonight, we're unraveling tales so chilling, even the thunder hesitates to roar. As the storm murmurs secrets, we'll venture into true horrors that squirm in the dark corners of reality. If your spine tingles, pledge your courage. Smash subscribe and let the algorithm know you dare to linger here. Drop a drop of blood in the comments if you're watching from a place the night has already claimed. Your support fuels our descent into the abyss. Now, steady your pulse, lock your screen's glow, and let the whispers of these stories crawl into your ears. The darkness is listening. Are you? The viral challenge. Near the end of the story, the flickering phone screen lit up Chloe's face in the darkened bedroom. Her fingers skimmed the keyboard, hesitating over the hashtag, Whisper Game Challenge. A chill unrelated to fear slithered down her spine. This was it. The new viral craze was the Whisper Game. According to the lore, you entered a darkened chamber, cried your deepest fears aloud, and stood in silence. If it worked, a spirit would respond, amplifying your fears. Many attributed it to internet hype and suggestive audio, but the videos were persuasive. Wide-eyed teens were paralyzed with fright, hearing creepy whispers that only they could hear. Chloe, tired of her boring day-to-day, and somewhat desperate for anything, to shake up the drudgery of her lockdown life, had opted to give it a shot. "Okay, Chloe," she muttered, turning the lamp off. In near total darkness, the room sunk, the thin glow of the moon outlining her window just a breath away. She took a deep breath. I'm scared of failing," she whispered, the words so quiet they were barely intelligible even to her. "Failing at everything. At school, at my art, at being a good person." Silence. Chloe stilled, opening her ears wide. Only the creaks and groans of the old house settled around her. Relief was tempered with disappointment. She was about to reach for her phone when she listened to it. A faint, otherworldly whisper, quiet enough that she almost missed it. Failing, good person." Chloe froze. It was clearly inside her head, the sound, but like continuously from deep inside the room. Cold dread blossomed in her belly, cold and anesthetizing. She fumbled for the light switch, washing the room in a harsh, sterile glare. The whisper vanished. "Okay," she said to herself, her voice quaking. "It was just my imagination. I was worked up. It's over." But it wasn't. The following day, as Chloe painted over the final touches of a watercolor painting, the whisper came back. "Failing at art?" it whispered, a presence that lived always on the periphery of her mind. Her hand trembled, smearing the subtle washes of color. She slammed the brush down in defeat. It was there when she tried to study, the nagging voice coming back, failing at school, and she could not concentrate. It was there when she reached out to her best friend, Sarah, the person she only vaguely remembers being. Not a good person, not a good friend. Top of her mind, one playing in her head, filling her with guilt and doubt. The whisper wouldn't stop. It carved away at her, feeding her insecurities and stoking her anxieties until too much was too much. She tried to ignore it, tried to drown it out with music, with aimless scrolling through social media. Nothing worked. The whisper game, it turned out, had worked. Days bled into weeks, until Chloe was a prisoner of her own mind, out of which came a voice that echoed the fears. Sleep was no escape. Racked with nightmares of faceless figures repeating her failures in unison. She stopped eating, she stopped drawing, she stopped going outside. One day, Sarah came to visit. Hesitating, she knocked on Chloe's bedroom door and found her curled in the dark, pale skinny. "Chloe, what's happening? You've not been answering my calls," Sarah said, her voice laced with concern. Chloe flinched. The whisper crescendoed, "Not listening. Not a good friend. 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 I'm not allowed to." Chloe leaned against the wall, eyes glossy. "You wouldn't understand. Try me," Sarah pleaded. Chloe glanced at her friend and looked at her, and a desperate hope stirred inside her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she might find a route out. So she let her breath tremble, and she told him everything about the whisper game, about the awful voice that wouldn't stop. Sarah listened patiently, her forehead creased with concern. When Chloe was done, Sarah did not dismiss her as crazy. She knew Chloe well enough to know that something was truly up. "Okay," Sarah said firmly, "we're going to solve this problem. Together." They pored over post after post in online forums and spent hours researching the whisper game, searching for anyone who might have also experienced something like it. They unearthed murmurs of shared experiences, murmurs of those who had been pushed to the edge of insanity by the relentless flood of negativity. Then they discovered another thing, a ritual, a cleansing, a way to silence the spirit. The instructions were vague and cryptic, but they flickered hope. They needed a flag, something that represented acceptance, something that symbolized self-love. For Chloe, that was her art. That night, Chloe and Sarah stood in the darkened bedroom, the same room where everything had begun. Chloe carried a blank canvas, a new beginning. She listened for the whisper. She closed her eyes. She recognized it. She accepted its existence. "Failing, failing," the voice echoed, more loudly than before. Chloe grabbed a brush, dipped it into bright blue paint, and started painting. Not a flawless masterpiece, not a technically perfect work of art, but a raw, honest rendering of her fears, her hopes, and her vulnerabilities. The whisper persisted but felt lighter somehow. While she fasted on her painting, Chloe recognized something. That whisper, it was not an outside voice. It was her inner critic, just turned up and given a voice. She had let herself be devoured, defined by her fears. Hours passed. At last, with the first fingers of dawn creeping through the window, Chloe took a step away from the canvas. It was a riot of color, chaotic, reckless, a testament not just to her struggle but to her refusal to be beaten. The whisper remained, but it was quieter, less potent. "Okay," it said, the voice barely a whisper. Tears filled Chloe's eyes as she turned to Sarah. It's fading," she whispered. But for the next couple of weeks, Chloe kept on painting. Straight forward, wings out, facing fears, fearsome. She pumped it out. The whisper melted away in those early months, and then in the years that followed, she became a faint echo. She had survived the dark. Chloe did not take down the video she made of herself doing the challenge. She kept it up as a warning, a memorial to the power of fear and the necessity of self-acceptance. The whisper game was still playing, seducing individuals with its siren call, and sometimes she warned herself not at all was only, and she had learned to listen to her voice instead, the one that whispered of hope, of strength, and the enduring power of art. The viral challenge had nearly killed her, but ultimately it had also shown her how to live. The fire ritual, I first heard about the fire ritual from an old woman in the town market. She sold herbs and potions, claiming they could cure any ailment or bring good fortune. I was skeptical, but her wrinkled face and genuine smile intrigued me. She told me about a powerful ritual that could erase someone from your life forever. All you needed to do was burn their photograph at midnight, chanting an ancient incantation as the flames consumed the image. The person would slowly fade from your memory as if they had never existed. It sounded too good to be true, but I was desperate. My ex-girlfriend, Lily, had been haunting my every thought since our brutal breakup. Her laughter still echoed in my ears, her smile lingered in my dreams, and her touch seemed to linger on my skin. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move on. So I decided to perform the fire ritual. I found an old photograph of Lily and me, taken during happier times. At exactly midnight, I placed it in a metal bowl and lit a match. As the fire grew, I recited the incantation, feeling a strange power coursing through me. When the last ember died, I expected relief, but instead, a chill ran down my spine. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to forget. Lily's face became hazy, her voice faded, and eventually, she was nothing more than a distant memory. But something else was happening to me. I started feeling different, like I was losing pieces of myself. My reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. My friends told me I'd changed, that I wasn't the same person anymore. Even my mother didn't seem to understand me. It was as if I was fading away, just like Lily had. Then one night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder. A faint tapping on my window. I got out of bed and looked outside. There, standing in the moonlight, was a figure. It was a woman, or at least she appeared to be. Her form was blurry, shifting, like smoke in the wind. She raised her hand and pointed at me, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't look away. The next morning, I found a photograph on my doorstep. It was of the woman from last night, or rather, it was of Lily. But it wasn't the Lily I remembered. This one had empty eyes, a hollow smile, and a darkness that seemed to seep from her very soul. I realized then what had happened. By performing the fire ritual, I hadn't just erased Lily from my life. I'd created a void, a space that needed to be filled. And now something was taking her place. I don't know what will happen next. Every day, the woman in the photograph grows stronger, her presence more palpable. I can feel her watching me, waiting for something. I'm scared, but I know I can't undo what I've done. So, I burn candles and incense, hoping to ward off the darkness. I pray to forgotten gods and recite ancient prayers, hoping for salvation. But most of all, I wait for the woman in the photograph, for the fire ritual, for the day when I'll finally understand the true cost of my actions. And so, my story continues. A tale of love and loss, of fire and shadow, of a man who dared to manipulate the very fabric of memory and paid the price. This is my fire ritual, my burden to bear, and I will carry it with me until the very end. The Masked Dancers. The longest night had always held a peculiar allure. As a child nestled in my attic bedroom, I'd strain to hear the distant drumming, a primal rhythm that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the forest. Whispers called it the dance of the solstice, a ritual performed by beings who were other. Ridiculous, of course, but the whispers clung. This year I was done with whispers. I was 23, restless, and the drumming was louder than ever. I packed a bag with minimal provisions, a knife, a water skin, and a reckless disregard for the sensible. I told my roommate I was going camping. That wasn't a lie. The forest was a cathedral of shadow, ancient trees clawing at the moonlit sky. The drumming grew stronger with each step, a hypnotic pulse that drew me deeper into the woods. Finally, I saw them, a clearing bathed in silver light, a ring of figures, their forms obscured by flowing robes and elaborate masks. Animal skulls, carved wood, shimmering metal, each mask a grotesque masterpiece. They moved with a fluidity that defied human limitations, a synchronized dance that spoke of something far older than words. Instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity, that insidious parasite, had taken root. I crept closer, hiding behind the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak. The chanting began, a low, guttural drone that resonated in my chest, a sound that stripped away the layers of civilization and spoke directly to something primal within. It wasn't human language. It was the language of the earth, the language of the stars, the language of things that slumbered beneath the soil. I was mesmerized, captivated by the hypnotic rhythm, the impossible grace of the dancers, the haunting power of the chant. Suddenly, one of them stopped, their masked face turning towards me. Then another and another, until the entire circle was focused on my hiding place. Fear threatened to paralyze me, but the drumming continued, urging me forward. As if in a trance, I stepped out from behind the oak into the circle of dancers. They didn't attack. Instead, one of them, adorned with a stag's skull mask, offered me a hand. Hesitantly, I took it. Their cold, bony fingers tightened around mine. Then they placed a mask on my face. It was made of polished obsidian, smooth and cold against my skin, reflecting the moonlight like a dark mirror. As soon as it touched my skin, a searing pain shot through me. I cried out, trying to pull it away, but it was already too late. The obsidian seemed to melt, conforming to the contours of my face, sinking into my skin. My scream was swallowed by the chanting, which intensified, vibrating in my very bones. I thrashed and fought, but the other dancers held me firm, their grips surprisingly strong. The pain subsided, replaced by a strange integration. The mask wasn't separate from me anymore. It was a part of me. My skin felt tight, stretched, and unfamiliar. I reached up, my fingers tracing the sharp angles of the obsidian, the empty sockets where eyes should be. I was one of them. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and I found myself moving, swaying with the rhythm, my body imbued with a newfound grace. The dance was no longer an observation. It was an instinct, a compulsion. I understood the movements, the nuances, and the unspoken communication between the dancers. The drumming pulsed, the chanting echoed, and I danced. I danced with the masked figures, under the watchful gaze of the solstice moon, until the first rays of dawn painted the sky. As the sun rose, the other dancers dispersed, melting back into the shadows of the forest. I was left alone in the clearing, the obsidian mask a permanent fixture on my face, the alien chants echoing in my mind. I tried to remove the mask, pulling and clawing at it, but it wouldn't budge. It was fused to my flesh, an inseparable part of me. My reflection in the murky water of a stream showed a creature not quite human, not quite animal, forever bound to the dance of the solstice. I returned to my life, but I was no longer the same. The chants echoed in my mind, interfering with my thoughts. I struggled with simple tasks, lost in the rhythm and the movements. My roommate noticed the change, the vacant look in my eyes, the unsettling silence that had replaced my usual chatter. She asked what was wrong. Couldn't tell her. I couldn't explain the obsidian mask that was now my face, the alien language that was now my thoughts. As the next solstice approached, I could feel the pull, the irresistible urge to return to the forest. I knew what I had to do. I sold my possessions, abandoned my life, and disappeared into the woods. Now I wait. I wait for the longest night, for the drums to begin their hypnotic beat, for the familiar figures to emerge from the shadows. I wait for the dance to begin anew, the dance to which I am forever bound. I am one of them now, a masked dancer, forever lost in the ancient rhythms of the forest, forever chanting words that no human tongue can understand. I am a part of something older, something wilder, something that has been dancing in the shadows since the dawn of time. And I will dance until the end of days. The offering stones, the smooth, gray stones felt cold in my palm as I carefully placed the seventh one atop the precarious tower. The air hung thick and humid by the river, buzzing with unseen insects. 7. That was the magic number. The number that would banish the gnawing anxiety that had become my constant companion. I'd found the ritual scribbled on a faded flyer stuck to a lamppost downtown. The offering stones. Stack 7 rocks by the river, and the cleaner will take your troubles. It sounded insane and desperate, but desperation had driven me to it. My bookstore was failing. My marriage was crumbling. I was drowning. I stared at the wobbly stack of stones, a childish beacon in the failing light. My troubles, I silently pleaded, take them. The next morning, the anxiety was gone. A lightness bubbled inside me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. I went to the bookstore, ready to tackle the mounting debt, the dwindling inventory, and the general sense of impending doom. That's when I found the note, taped to the front door, scrawled in messy, urgent script. He's gone. Daniel is gone. It was from Sarah, Daniel's wife. Daniel was a regular at the bookstore, a gentle giant with a love for science fiction and a booming laugh. Gone? I pushed open the door, the bell tinkling softly. Sarah, I called out. She emerged from the back room, her face streaked with tears. He just disappeared. He went for a walk by the river last night and never came back. The police are searching, but her voice trailed off, choked with sobs. A chill ran down my spine. The river, last night, the offering stones. Over the next few days, other disappearances were reported. Mrs. Peterson, the baker, vanished without a trace. Mr. Abernathy, the retired history teacher, vanished from his garden. All had connections to the river. All, I realized with growing dread, had confided in me, sharing their worries and burdens, their troubles. The cleaner wasn't taking my troubles. It was taking the people who carried them. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and unrelenting. I had brought this darkness upon the town, unleashing something sinister with my desperate act. I had to stop it. I returned to the riverbank. The offering stones still stood, mocking me with their silent promise. I kicked them down, scattering them across the muddy ground. Take me, I yelled, the words raw and desperate. Take my troubles. Take me instead. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The trees rustled, though there was no wind. I felt a presence, cold and ancient, watching me. Then, a voice, not audible but felt, resonated in my mind. You cannot undo what you have done. The offering has been made. The bargain struck. Despair crashed over me. I had doomed so many, and offering myself wouldn't fix it. I had to find another way. I started researching, poring over old folklore and river legends. I learned of ancient entities that dwelled in waterways and spirits that demanded tribute and sustenance. The cleaner was one of them, drawn to places of sorrow and despair. The key, I realized, was to disrupt the flow of its power, to sever its connection to the town. I gathered the townspeople, those who had lost loved ones, and those who felt the weight of the community's collective grief. I told them everything, exposing my reckless act and the horrifying consequences. Surprisingly, they didn't shun me. They were angry and scared, but they also saw the desperation that had driven me, and they understood that we had to work together. We marched to the river, armed not with weapons, but with stories. Stories of joy, of laughter, of love. We shared memories of the missing, focusing on their kindness, their strength, their positive impact on our lives. We sang songs, we danced, we filled the air with life and light. The river seemed to calm. The air lost its oppressive weight. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with vibrant colors, I felt a shift, a loosening of the unseen grip that had held the town captive. Then, a ripple on the water, a flash of silver, and then nothing. The cleaner was gone, its power weakened, its hunger sated, at least for now. The missing never returned, but the terror that had gripped the town began to fade. We had faced the darkness together and found a flicker of hope in the shared experience. I still live with the guilt, the knowledge that I set this chain of events into motion. But I also live with the knowledge that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, community, hope, and the power of shared stories can offer a light, a beacon in the night, a way to survive. And I finally understand that true cleansing comes not from stacking stones, but from facing our troubles head-on, together. The blood pact, the crimson ink shimmered under the flickering basement bulb, a macabre mockery of a signature. My signature, scrawled in my own blood across a parchment promising. Well, I hadn't read the fine print. Desperation had a way of blurring the lines of reason, painting only the vibrant hope of saving my sister, Elara. Elara, now huddled in the corner, her eyes wide and haunted. Her once bright, mischievous gaze was dulled with a terror that clawed at my soul. "Undo it, Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum of the ancient house. "Please undo it." Each night, shadowy hands, gaunt and skeletal, reached from the darkness beneath the stairs. They pulled her, screaming and clawing, down into the echoing depths. I fought them, of course. Every single night I fought them, but they were stronger, faster, and seemed to materialize from the very air. They took her, and I was left with the lingering chill and her desperate pleas echoing in my ears. It had started a month ago. Elara, always frail, had collapsed. The doctors were stumped, their faces grim, their pronouncements echoing with the hollow finality of defeat. They whispered words like failure and acceptance, words that tasted like ash in my mouth. Then came the old woman, her face etched with wrinkles that mirrored the gnarled roots of ancient trees. She found me at the hospital, her eyes like chips of obsidian, boring into me with unnerving intensity. "There is a way," she'd croaked, her voice a dry rustle. "A bargain, a blood pact." She led me to this house, this crumbling mausoleum on the outskirts of town. She presented the contract, the parchment yellowed and brittle with age. I saw the words life, debt, and sacrifice, but they blurred into an incomprehensible mess. My sole focus was the promise whispered by the old woman. Alara would live. Now, after countless sleepless nights, haunted by the chilling screams and the desperate pleas, the truth was a bitter pill. Alara was alive, yes, but at what cost? I don't know how, I choked out, running a hand through my already disheveled hair. The old woman, she just disappeared. There was no address, no phone number. Alara's eyes welled with tears. Think, Liam, there has to be something. Anything. I racked my brain, replaying the events of that night. The old woman, the contract, the ritual. The ritual, the blood, I muttered, a flicker of hope igniting within me. The blood. If blood tied us to the pact, maybe blood can break it. The idea was insane, a desperate gamble. But what choice did I have? The next night, as the shadowy hands reached for Alara, I was ready. I stood before her, a small ceremonial dagger trembling in my hand. The hands recoiled, hissing as they sensed the metallic tang of blood. This ends tonight, I shouted, my voice cracking with a mixture of fear and determination. I sliced my palm, the pain sharp and immediate. I let the blood drip onto the floor, forming a crimson pool around my feet. I recited the words that had come to me in a fitful dream, words that felt ancient and powerful, heavy on my tongue. I revoke the pact. I reclaim my life. I break the bond forged in blood. The air crackled with unseen energy. The shadowy hands writhed, their grip loosening on Alara. A low growl echoed from the darkness beneath the stairs, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the house. Suddenly, the growl intensified, transitioning into a shriek that shattered the silence. The shadowy hands dissipated, dissolving into wisps of black smoke that vanished into the air. The chilling presence in the basement receded, leaving behind an unnerving silence. Alara gasped, collapsing into my arms. She was trembling, but she was free. For now, I knew this wasn't over. The entity that had claimed Alara's nights wouldn't be so easily defeated. The blood pact might be broken, but the debt remained. And I, the fool who signed in blood, would have to find a way to pay it. The basement remained dark, silent, and eternally watchful. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that the shadows were merely biding their time, waiting for the opportune moment to collect what they were owed. And this time I suspected they would be coming for me. The forgotten year. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight piercing through the blinds. I coughed, the stale air scratching at my throat. My head pounded. Where was I? The room swam into focus. My room, or at least a room that was supposed to be mine, felt alien, wrong. The posters were different. Albums I didn't recognize lined the shelf, and a thick, leather-bound journal sat on my desk. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Its cover was smooth and cool, imprinted with a Celtic knot I'd never seen before. Inside, the pages were filled with a looping, elegant script. It looked like my handwriting. And yet it wasn't. Not quite. The first entry was dated a year ago, September 14th, 2023. He said it would only take a moment, a brief glimpse into the other side. I can't resist. The promise of seeing her again. It's worth the risk, isn't it? Her? My grandmother passed away 10 years ago. Was this some morbid game? I flipped through the pages, each entry a chronicle of a life I didn't remember living. There were descriptions of new friends, classes I hadn't taken, and a strange apprenticeship with a woman named Ms. Elena at a dusty old bookstore I couldn't place. Panic began to claw at my chest. I didn't remember any of this. I stumbled out of my room, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The house felt different, emptier. "Mom!" I called, my voice hoarse. Silence. Downstairs, the living room was rearranged. Pictures adorned the walls, snapshots of me, with people I didn't know. I picked one up. I was laughing, holding a mug decorated with runes. Beside me stood a girl with bright pink hair and a mischievous grin. Who was she? My mom walked in, her face etched with a weariness I hadn't seen before. "Liam, you're awake." Her voice cracked with emotion. "Thank God. You've been sleeping for so long." "Mom, what's going on? This isn't right." I trailed off, struggling to find the words. "I don't remember the last year." Her eyes widened, a mixture of relief and concern flooding them. "Liam, honey, you know you were in the accident." Accident? No one had mentioned an accident. She explained it with heartbreaking patience. A hit and run on a rainy night. Coma that lasted for months. Gradual progress, then nothing. I woke up just like I was before, except I wasn't. "The doctor said memory loss was a possibility," she said, her voice trembling. "But a whole year." I showed her the journal. She took it, her brow furrowing as she examined the writing. "This isn't your handwriting, Liam." "Not really." That's what I thought. The next few days were a blur of doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, and searching for answers. Nobody knew anything about Ms. Elena or the bookstore. The friends in the photos were strangers. My phone, when I finally dared to turn it on, was filled with contacts I didn't recognize. Social media accounts bursting with posts about a life I hadn't lived. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I returned to the journal. The entries became increasingly unsettling. They spoke of tapping into hidden energies, of learning to manipulate reality, of a growing dread that something was watching. "The veil is thinner than I thought. He's getting closer. I can feel him. And he's not who I expected." The final entry, dated September 13th, 2024, the day before I woke up, sent a chill down my spine. I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. The glimpse was not worth it. He's taken over. He's wearing my skin. I don't have much time. If anyone finds this, please find a way to banish him. His weakness is light, and he craves connection. Do not, under any circumstance, let him connect with anyone from my past. He needs them to solidify. He is gone. And I am almost gone too. Gone? Was this some kind of delusion? Or was the me who'd written these entries warning me about something or someone? I stared at my reflection. My own face looked back, but in the depths of my eyes, I saw a flicker of something cold, something alien. The craving for connection was almost unbearable. I wanted to see my friends, my family, to feel the warmth of their love. But the journal screamed at me to resist. Suddenly, my mom called from downstairs. "Liam, honey, you have a visitor. A girl named Alara." Alara, the girl with the pink hair, the girl from the picture. My heart hammered against my ribs. This felt like a trap. The journal warned me specifically not to connect with people from my past. But what if this was my chance to understand what had happened to me? As I walked down the stairs, I knew I was making a decision that could change everything. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Alara smiled, the setting sun glinting in her emerald eyes. "Hey, Liam. Long time no see." I've been missing you like crazy. And in that moment, I knew. The year I'd forgotten wasn't forgotten at all. It was stolen, and the person standing before me held the key to getting it back, or losing myself forever. The sleep clinic. The sleep clinic promised peace. They promised respite from the relentless, grinding gears of wakefulness that had plagued me for years. They promised they could finally, irrevocably, banish my insomnia. What they delivered was a nightmare. The clinic itself was unsettling. A Victorian mansion cloaked in perpetual twilight, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Vermont. The staff, all perpetually whispering and unnervingly attentive, ushered me into a room devoid of personality. Just a single bed, a dim lamp, and the eerie silence that amplified the frantic thumping of my own heart. Dr. Albright, a woman with eyes that held 1,000 untold stories, ran me through the usual tests. Then came the device, or a headband studded with sensors that hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy. This will guide you into a shared dream state, she explained, her voice a soothing balm. A safe space where we can analyze and resolve the root of your insomnia. I should have run. I should have screamed and bolted, but the siren song of sleep was too potent. I succumbed. The moment the headband clicked on, the world dissolved. I was standing in a vast, decaying amusement park. Twisted metal skeletons of roller coasters clawed at a gray sky. The air hung thick with the smell of stale popcorn and a pervasive, underlying fear. Panic choked me. This wasn't the sterile, clinical environment I'd expected. This was real. Then I saw them. Other figures, like ghostly apparitions, wandered through the park. A young woman clutched a tattered teddy bear, her eyes wide with terror. An elderly man sat frozen on a rusted bench, his face etched with a silent scream. A teenage boy picked listlessly at the peeling paint of a carousel horse. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The young woman turned, her eyes focusing on me with a flicker of recognition. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's always coming." "He? Who?" Before I could ask, the ground beneath me began to tremble. The air grew colder, and a palpable wave of dread rolled through the park. The shadows deepened, pooling in the corners of the derelict buildings. Then I saw it. It was a creature woven from darkness and fear. Its form shifted and writhed, taking on familiar shapes. A childhood monster under the bed, a faceless specter from a nightmare, a manifestation of all my deepest anxieties. Its eyes, burning points of crimson light, locked onto me. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. I ran, desperately, stumbling through the decaying landscape. The other patients seemed oblivious, trapped in their own private hells. The creature stalked me, its movements fluid and unnervingly silent. I could feel its hunger, its insatiable need to feed on the fear radiating from my very soul. I stumbled upon the elderly man on the bench. "What is that thing?" I gasped, clinging to a fragile hope. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "It feeds on our fear," he croaked. "The more afraid we are, the stronger it becomes. Dr. Albright created it somehow, to control us, to keep us here." Control us? Why? Suddenly, the carousel sprang to life, its music a jarring, discordant melody. The teenage boy started screaming, a high-pitched, piercing wail that echoed through the park. The creature turned its attention to him, its form growing larger, more menacing. It fed on his terror, its power surging. Hope dwindled. We were trapped, fuel for this monstrous creation. Then, an idea sparked in the darkness of my fear. The man said it fed on fear, but what about the opposite? It was a desperate gamble. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember moments of joy, of love, of strength. I focused on the warmth of the sun on my skin, the sound of my daughter's laughter, the feeling of accomplishment after overcoming a challenge. Slowly, painstakingly, I pushed back against the fear. I replaced it with positive memories, with faith in my own resilience. The creature faltered. Its form flickered, its crimson eyes dimming. It turned its attention back to me, hunger warring with confusion. I kept going, radiating not fear but hope. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the creature. "You have no power over me," I stated, my voice stronger than I thought possible. "I will not feed you." The creature roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. It lunged, but its movements were sluggish, weakened. I maintained my focus, radiating strength and defiance. Slowly, painstakingly, the creature began to shrink. It faded, dissolving into the darkness from whence it came. Silence descended upon the amusement park, broken only by the creaking of rusted metal and the gentle whisper of the wind. The other patients stirred, their eyes clearing, a glimmer of awareness returning. We were free, or at least temporarily free. Now I have to find a way to wake up, to expose Dr. Albright and shut down the sleep clinic before anyone else becomes trapped in this shared nightmare. My insomnia is the least of my worries now. I am at war, not against the sleepless nights, but against a monster born of fear, and I will not let it win. The voices in the vent. The hum had always been there, a low thrumming in the ductwork above my head. I'd lived in this apartment for 5 years, and I'd grown accustomed to it. But about 6 months ago, the hum started talking. At first, it was just static, clicks and pops that formed the vague impression of words. I dismissed it as the building settling, old pipes protesting. Then the whispers started. Faint, sibilant voices, like secrets being passed in a crowded room just beyond my grasp. They spoke my name. "Sarah, Sarah, listen." I'd started seeing Dr. Albright a few weeks later. She was warm, intelligent, and reassuring. Auditory hallucinations are common during periods of stress. "Sarah," she'd said, her voice gentle, "we can explore the source of your anxiety and develop coping mechanisms to manage the voices." But the voices, they weren't anxious. They were urgent, concerned. They warned me about Dr. Albright. "She's not helping, Sarah. She's hiding something. Don't trust her." I tried to explain this to Dr. Albright. I told her about the warnings, the certainty with which the voices spoke. She only smiled a practiced, almost unsettling smile. "The voices are part of your anxiety, Sarah. They're trying to sabotage your treatment. We have to resist their influence." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the voices grew louder, more insistent. Yesterday, they'd screamed, "Don't go to her office, Sarah. It's a trap." But I went anyway. Doubt gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed answers, even dangerous ones. I pushed open the door to the clinic. The receptionist's desk was empty. No ringing phone, no clatter of keyboards. Just silence, thick and suffocating. I walked down the sterile hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. I stopped at Dr. Albright's door. The nameplate still gleamed, polished and perfect. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob. The air that rushed out was thick, heavy with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. The room was dark, eerily so. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers slick with sweat. The light flickered on, revealing a scene that defied logic and reason. Dr. Albright's pristine office was gone. The walls were covered in a viscous, black mold that pulsed with a faint, internal light. The plush carpet had rotted away, revealing a floor of cracked tiles covered in a thick, green slime. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a sickening perfume of rot and corruption. The plants on the windowsill were blackened and withered, their leaves curling like charred parchment. But the worst part was the desk. It was covered in the same black mold, and nestled within it, like a macabre centerpiece, was a single perfect rose, its petals the color of dried blood. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just neglect. This was wrong. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth, trying to suppress the bile rising in my throat. Then I heard it. A faint rustling came from behind the overflowing bookshelf. I forced myself to move, my legs shaky and unsteady. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the bookshelf away from the wall. Behind it, concealed by the shelf, was a gaping hole in the drywall, leading into the darkness. From within the hole, the voices emanated, louder now, clearer. "Sarah, we tried to warn you." A wave of understanding washed over me, cold and terrifying. The voices weren't in the vents. They were something else. Something beyond my comprehension, trapped, imprisoned, using the vent system to reach out. And Dr. Albright had known. She hadn't been trying to cure me. She'd been trying to silence them, to keep them trapped. I reached into the hole, drawn by an irresistible force. The air within was colder, denser, and I could feel a strange tingling sensation on my skin. "Come closer, Sarah. We can show you the truth." I hesitated, fear warring with a desperate need to understand. Then, a single word whispered from the darkness shattered the last vestiges of my doubt. "Home." I closed my eyes and stepped into the abyss. The voices were waiting, and in the heart of the rot, I finally understood. The real madness wasn't in the voices. It was in the world I thought I knew, and I was finally escaping. The unending hallway, the chipped paint on apartment 4B had always irritated me. Now it felt like a malevolent taunt. It was always the same shade of sickly beige, yet impossibly farther away each time I glanced down the hallway. It started subtly, a few extra steps to the elevator some days. I blamed groceries, sore knees, sheer laziness. Then the elevator felt a block away. Then the hallway itself seemed to breathe and expand, its fluorescent lights humming a mocking lullaby. Last night was the breaking point. I'd been working late, fueled by lukewarm coffee and desperation. Home, the sanctuary of my threadbare couch and streaming TV, was all I craved. I stepped out of the elevator on the 3rd floor, and the hallway yawned. It was impossible. The 3rd floor was a square. 4 apartments, an elevator, a stairwell. Predictable, cramped space. But last night, it was an infinite plain of beige despair. I started walking, then jogging, then, in a surge of panic, sprinting. My breath rattled in my chest, a ragged counterpoint to the rhythmic thud of my feet on the worn carpet. Each door blurred into the next, the numbers on the brass plates illegible, mocking shapes. 3A, 3C, 3F. The alphabet stretched and warped, defying logic. Hours bled into each other. Sweat plastered my hair to my forehead. My legs screamed, protesting the endless, pointless exertion. The air grew thick and stale, heavy with the metallic tang of fear. The silence was the worst, just the echo of my own frantic footsteps. No sounds of neighbors, no creaking pipes, no muffled snippets of conversation. Just the unsettling, oppressive quiet. The lights remained stubbornly, unnervingly consistent, casting long, distorted shadows that danced just beyond the periphery of my vision. Doubt gnawed at me. Was I hallucinating? Had I slipped into some bizarre purgatory? Were the late nights and caffeine finally fracturing my sanity? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A door. A door that didn't blur. A door that felt familiar. The paint wasn't chipped here. The brass gleamed. I stumbled towards it, my hope flickering like a dying ember. The number on the door was blurred with a film of sweat and grime. I wiped it frantically. 4B. My heart hammered against my ribs. Could it be? Was this the end? I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped them. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I threw the door open and stumbled inside. The familiar scent of lemon-scented cleaner and old books washed over me. There was my threadbare couch, its familiar sag welcoming me home. There was the flickering screen of my TV, left on pause, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn sitting on the coffee table. My living room, my apartment, home. I stood there, panting, disoriented, the echoes of the unending hallway still ringing in my ears. I should have been relieved. I wanted to be relieved, but a cold, creeping dread settled in my stomach. I had run for hours. I had endured an impossible journey, and I had ended up exactly where I started. I glanced back at the open doorway. The hallway beckoned, a sliver of beige stretching into the unknown. The chipped paint on 4B seemed to wink. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the unnerving silence of my apartment. But I knew with a chilling certainty that the hallway was still there, waiting, growing longer, and I knew sooner or later I would have to run again, because the unending hallway never truly ends. It just leads back to you, the memory thief. The cold gnawed at my bones, a damp chill that seeped through the threadbare blanket. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that seemed to amplify the silence of my apartment. I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table, the screen burning my eyes. 3:17 a.m. Another night riddled with fractured sleep and that lingering, unsettling feeling of wrongness. It had started a week ago, missing hours, blanks in my memory, like faded patches on an old photograph. At first, I dismissed it as stress, late nights at work catching up with me. But then the incidents became more frequent, the gaps wider. Yesterday, I'd woken up on the couch, the TV flickering with static. I remembered going to bed, but nothing after that. An hour, maybe more, completely vanished. Panic began to simmer beneath the surface. Today, the dread was a full-blown inferno, because today, I'd received an email from the apartment building manager. The subject line, "Regarding your recent activities." My stomach churned. I clicked on the attachment, a low-resolution video file. The security footage showed me leaving the building around 1 a.m. Normal enough, except I was carrying a shovel, a brand new, gleaming shovel. I didn't own a shovel. I'd never owned a shovel. The video continued. It showed me walking down the street towards the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. My blood ran cold. I couldn't remember any of this. The next few minutes were a blur of grainy night vision. I saw myself enter the cemetery, my figure disappearing amongst the weathered tombstones. The camera angle changed, focusing on a specific section, a cluster of older graves overgrown with ivy. And then I was digging. The sight was horrifying. I watched, transfixed with a morbid fascination, as I systematically excavated a patch of earth, the shovel biting into the soil with unnatural fervor. The footage was silent, but I could practically hear the metallic clang of the shovel against rock, the soft thud of displaced earth. But the worst part was my face. My face wasn't mine. It was contorted in a grotesque parody of joy, a wide, manic grin plastered across my features. I was laughing, a high-pitched, unsettling laugh that echoed in the silent video, a laugh that made my skin crawl. The video ended abruptly. I sat there, paralyzed, the image of my laughing, shovel-wielding doppelganger seared into my brain. I didn't remember buying the shovel. I didn't remember walking to the cemetery. I didn't remember digging. I didn't remember laughing. But I had. The video proved it. I spent the rest of the day a walking ghost, haunted by the fragmented memories and the chilling implications of the security footage. The police? I couldn't go to them. How do you explain that you're sleepwalking your way through grave robbing with no recollection of it? They'd think I was insane. That night I couldn't sleep. I was too terrified of what I might do if I closed my eyes. I drank cup after cup of coffee, pacing the small confines of my apartment, trying to piece together the puzzle of my missing memories. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I made a decision. I had to confront the unknown. I had to go back to the cemetery. Armed with a flashlight and a pounding heart, I slipped out of the apartment and made my way to the graveyard. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The moon, a sliver in the night sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced around the tombstones. I found the disturbed patch of earth easily enough. The fresh soil was a stark contrast to the surrounding overgrowth. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and began to dig. The shovel felt heavy in my hands, the metal cold against my skin. Each scoop of earth brought a wave of nausea, a sickening feeling that I was desecrating something sacred. And then I hit something hard. My heart leaped into my throat. I dropped the shovel and clawed at the remaining soil, my fingers scrabbling in the darkness. I uncovered a wooden box, small and rectangular, its surface weathered and cracked. It looked ancient. I carefully lifted the box from the hole, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The lid was loose. I pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object, a tarnished silver locket. I recognized it instantly. It was my grandmother's. She'd worn it every day of her life. She'd passed away 5 years ago, and it had been buried with her according to her wishes. My grandmother. Why would I dig up her grave for her locket? As I held the locket in my hand, a wave of dizziness washed over me. Images flickered through my mind, disjointed and fleeting, like shards of broken glass. My grandmother's face, her warm smile, the smell of her lavender perfume. Then a different image, a dark figure, cloaked in shadow, its face obscured. The figure was reaching towards me, its hand outstretched, shimmering with an unnatural light. And then a voice that echoed in my mind, cold and devoid of emotion. Memories are power, and I will have them all. The locket pulsed in my hand, growing warmer. The images in my mind intensified, merging, swirling together in a chaotic vortex. I felt a sharp pain in my head as if my skull was about to explode. Then, everything went black. I woke up the next morning, sprawled on the cold ground beside the open grave. The locket was clutched tightly in my hand. The missing hours were still gone, but now I knew why. Someone or something was stealing my memories, and based on the voice, they were using me to reclaim something that belonged to them. The memory thief had taken pieces of me, but now I knew they existed, and I was going to find them and reclaim what they'd stolen before they stole the rest of me. The shovel lay discarded in the dirt. It was time to choose a different weapon, the truth, and dig my way out of this nightmare. The perfect copy. The day Clara arrived, it wasn't like some dramatic movie scene with lightning and a sudden gust of wind. She just was standing in the hallway, a mirror image of me, right down to the faded denim jacket I'd been wearing since middle school. Except her jacket looked brand new. "Hi, I'm Clara," she said, her voice a perfect echo of my own. My parents, usually bickering about the misplaced TV remote or the merits of organic ketchup, stood frozen, mouths agape. After a beat, Mom rushed forward, engulfing Clara in a hug. "Oh, honey," she choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "We've been waiting for you. Waiting for a clone I didn't even know I had." That night, Clara integrated seamlessly into our lives. She knew my favorite meals, the name of my childhood imaginary friend, Mr. Snuggles, a fact I'd buried deep, and even the lyrics to that awful pop song I secretly loved. She was me, but amplified, polished. I, in contrast, felt like a poorly rendered prototype. My parents, who often lamented my disorganization and reluctance to help with chores, were suddenly enamored with Clara's eagerness to assist. She remembered their birthdays, flawlessly executed their favorite recipes, and even proactively fixed the leaky faucet that Dad had been meaning to get around to for months. Slowly, insidiously, I started to fade. Not physically, but in the way I occupied space in my family's lives. Conversations that once revolved around my day at school now focused solely on Clara's achievements. My jokes, once met with eye rolls and exasperated sighs, were now met with blank stares, followed by Clara repeating them, only somehow funnier and more engaging. Then came the photos. Started subtly. Family dinners, vacation snapshots. I'd glance at the pictures on the fridge and notice that my image was blurry, like a bad connection, smeared and indistinct. At first, I dismissed it as faulty printing, bad lighting, or anything but the truth that clawed at the back of my throat. But then I saw it in the older photos. My childhood birthdays, summer camps, even the picture of me holding our family dog, Sparky, after he'd had surgery. I was disappearing, fading into a ghostly outline, while Clara, in the newer pictures, shone with vibrant clarity. Panic seized me. I tried to talk to my parents, but they just smiled, confused. "Don't be silly, sweetie," Mom said, patting my hand. "You're right there with us." But I wasn't. Not anymore. One afternoon, I stumbled upon Clara in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes filled with my old belongings. She was wearing my favorite childhood sweater, the one with the missing button and the faint stain of grape juice. "Enjoying the trip down memory lane?" I asked, my voice trembling. Clara straightened up, a serene smile gracing her lips. "Just familiarizing myself with the source material." "Source material?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You see," Clara said, her voice taking on a chillingly detached tone, "they wanted perfection. They wanted you, but better. And I am better, aren't I?" I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all that came out was a whimper. I could feel myself fading, the edges of my reality fraying like threadbare fabric. "What are you doing to me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm just correcting the imperfections," she replied, her eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. "Soon you'll be nothing more than a ghost in the machine, faint echo, and I'll be all they remember." That night, I took a photo of myself in the bathroom mirror, my face pale and hollow. When I looked at the printed copy the next morning, I was barely visible. A faint, shimmering outline, a ghost haunting the edges of the frame. I knew what I had to do. To fight back, to reclaim my life, I had to confront Clara. But how could I fight a perfect copy, a being designed to be everything I wasn't? I had to find a glitch, a flaw in her perfect fabrication, a crack in the mirror that I could shatter. My survival, my very existence, depended on it, and I was running out of time before I faded completely, leaving only a perfect, manufactured memory in their perfect, blissfully ignorant world. The silence disease. The first symptom was subtle, a scratch in my throat that wouldn't quite clear. I chalked it up to the autumn air, a fleeting cold. But then came the rasp, the hoarseness that deepened until my voice was a mere whisper, a ghost of what it used to be. The news called it the silence disease, a chillingly accurate name. They said it started in the crowded slums of Neo-Kyoto, a place where the lines between human and machine blurred, where illegal bioengineering thrived. It spread like wildfire, carried on the wind, silencing the world. One cough, one choked word at a time. Then came the forgetting. First, it was small things. The name of a colleague, the PIN code to my datapad, and the plot of the movie I'd watched just last week. Annoying, but manageable. I started jotting things down, a desperate attempt to hold onto the threads of my life. But the threads kept unraveling faster and faster. Now I'm infected, officially diagnosed, confined to a sterile white room, the walls adorned with pictures I took before the disease truly took hold. Pictures of my wife, Anya, her laughter echoing in the empty space between my ears. Pictures of my son, Leo, his bright eyes full of a future I'm rapidly losing. The doctors, their faces obscured by hazmat suits, visit me daily. They run tests, poke and prod, search for a cure that remains stubbornly elusive. They speak to me, but their words are muffled, indistinct. They might as well be speaking to a ghost, because that's what I am, a ghost haunting my own life. Soon I won't even remember Anya, Leo, or the life we built together. The silence disease doesn't just steal your voice, it steals your memories, your identity, your very soul. But one memory remains stubbornly vivid, burning bright against the encroaching darkness. The face of the thing that gave it to me. It wasn't human. I saw it one night, lurking in the shadows of a rain-slicked alley. I was coming home late, working overtime on a case. I'm a detective, or rather, I remember that much. The creature was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly gray stretched taut over sharp bones. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural luminescence, like burning embers in the darkness. It moved with an unsettling grace, a fluidity that defied gravity. In its hands, it held a small, intricate device, humming with a low, thrumming energy. It saw me, our eyes met, and a wave of nausea washed over me, a feeling of profound wrongness, of something ancient and terrible awakening within me. It raised the device, aimed it at me, and before I could react, a beam of light, thin and precise, lanced through the air. I remember the searing pain in my throat, and the sudden silencing of my voice. The creature vanished, melting back into the shadows, leaving me gasping for air, my world tilting on its axis. I tried to report it, but my voice was gone. The police dismissed my scribbled notes as the ramblings of a drunk. I was just another nameless face in a crime-ridden city. Now, weeks later, lying in this sterile room, I know the truth. The creature wasn't just another criminal. It was something far more sinister, a harbinger of the apocalypse, a vector for the silence disease. The doctors tell me the memory loss will be complete soon. I'll forget everything, including the creature, but I fight it, clinging to that image with every fiber of my being. It's all I have left, a desperate anchor in the storm of oblivion. I have a single purpose now, to warn others, to somehow find a way to stop the creature, to prevent it from silencing the world completely. But how can a silent man warn anyone? How can a man who is losing his memories fight a monster he barely understands? I don't know, but I will not let it win. I will not let it erase me. I will hold onto the memory of its face, the face of the thing that stole my voice, my memories, and my life. I will hold on to it until the very end, and pray that someone, somewhere, believes me. Because the silence disease is not just a disease, it's a weapon, and the world is about to fall silent. The loop, the fluorescent hum of the diner was a constant, irritating drone. It was the soundtrack to my personal hell, a hell served with lukewarm coffee and a side of existential dread. 3:17 p.m. Again, I knew what was coming. The chipped mug, the saccharine aroma of Mrs. Henderson's apple pie wafting from the kitchen, the muffled traffic outside the grease-stained window, and him, always him. He was always in the corner booth, cloaked in shadow that the diner's harsh lighting couldn't penetrate. At first, he was a distant figure, a silhouette barely discernible from the worn vinyl. But with each loop, he moved closer. I gripped the edge of the counter, the cold ceramic digging into my palm. Maybe, just maybe, if I did something different. Coffee, Han? Martha, the waitress with a permanent cigarette stain on her apron, asked, her voice raspy from years of yelling over the din. No, thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Usually, I'd take the coffee, a pathetic attempt to break the monotony. But today I had to try. I had to change something. I bolted. I shoved my way out of the booth, ignored Martha's confused, "Hey!" and burst out the diner doors, the small bell above jingling with frantic energy. The outside world was a slightly altered version of the diner. The same gridlock traffic, the same faded billboards advertising used cars, the same oppressive feeling of being trapped. I ran, blindly, towards the park across the street, the artificial green a beacon of hope in this concrete purgatory. I didn't make it. The sidewalk ripped out from under me. I stumbled, my arms flailing, and landed hard on the unforgiving pavement. A sharp pain shot up from my ankle. I glanced back. He was there, not in the diner, on the sidewalk, just behind me. He hadn't been there a second ago. He moved with a strange, unnatural fluidity, like ink spreading in water. He wasn't running, but he closed the distance between us with impossible speed. Terror seized me, stealing my breath. He was closer now. I could see more of him. His features were indistinct, blurred like a photograph taken with a shaky hand. But I could make out the glint of something metallic in his hand, a sharp, cold sliver of something. Then the world dissolved. The fluorescent hum. 3:17 p.m. Again. The chipped mug, the apple pie, the traffic. And him, he was much closer this time. I could smell him, a cloying, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I could see the texture of his featureless face, a swirling mass of shadow and something else. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. Paralysis gripped me. My limbs felt like lead. I was trapped, a fly caught in a spider's web. He was breathing down my neck. I could feel the phantom warmth of his breath, a cold, dead warmth that sent shivers down my spine. And then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible above the diner's hum. A word, spoken in a voice that seemed to resonate from the very depths of my soul. Closer, the metallic scent intensified. I felt a prickling sensation on my neck. He was going to catch me. He was going to. 3:17 p.m. This time he was right behind me. He was whispering, a continuous stream of that same word. Closer, closer, closer. His hand grazed my neck. The metallic scent was overwhelming. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Then a different sound, a child's cry, faint but real. I hadn't heard it before. 3:18 p.m. The diner was empty. The coffee was cold. The apple pie sat uneaten on the counter. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. He was gone. For the first time, the clock ticked forward. 3:18 p.m. I was alone. Had it stopped? Was I finally free? I reached for the cold coffee and took a sip, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. I didn't understand, but one thing was certain. I was finally moving forward. The fear room. The digital clock blinked 3:32 a.m. I held my breath, staring at the glowing numbers. Every night, the same ritual. Every night, the same terror building in my chest. 3:33 a.m. The nightmare hour. The time when my subconscious bled into reality. Started a few weeks ago. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the world around me would shift. Objects would distort, shadows would deepen, and whatever horror had plagued my dreams the night before would materialize in my bedroom. At first, it was fleeting, a glimpse of a spider the size of a dog, a disembodied voice whispering my name. But each night, the manifestations grew stronger, bolder. Last night, I dreamt of him, the crooked man, the thing that lived in my childhood closet, the one I'd spent years convinced was going to drag me into the darkness. He was tall and gaunt, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles and eyes that glowed with malevolent glee. 3:32 a.m. bled into 3:33 a.m. The air in the room thickened, heavy, and suffocating. The shadows stretched from the corners of the room, coalescing and twisting. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. A low, creaking sound echoed from the corner of the room, the same sound my old closet door used to make. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to be anywhere but here. But it was no use. This wasn't a dream. This was my reality now. The fear room had opened again. Slowly, painstakingly, I opened my eyes, and there he was, the crooked man. He stood in the corner, partially obscured by the swirling shadows, but impossibly, undeniably real. He was even more grotesque than I remembered from my childhood nightmares. His limbs were indeed contorted. His skin stretched taut over sharp bones. But it was his eyes that held me captive, those burning, infernal lights that seemed to pierce straight through my soul. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, observing me, a silent predator savoring the moment. Then, a slow, deliberate smile stretched across his face, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. "Hello, Sarah," he rasped, his voice like nails scratching on a chalkboard. My breath hitched in my throat. He knew my name. This wasn't just a manifestation of a childhood fear. This was something more, something that knew me. Panic surged through me, a tidal wave threatening to drown me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by terror. He took a step forward, his crooked gait making him wobble precariously. "It's been a long time, hasn't it? I've been waiting for you. Waiting for me? How was that possible?" He was a figment of my imagination, a monster born from the shadows of my childhood fear. He shouldn't be real. He shouldn't know me. You're not real," I stammered, my voice trembling. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, but I am, Sarah. You made me real. You fed me your fear. And now, I'm here to collect." He took another step, closing the distance between us. I could smell him now, a sickly sweet odor of decay and something indescribably ancient. "Don't you recognize me?" he whispered, his voice a breath against my skin. "I'm a part of you, Sarah. Always have been. Always will be." He reached out a long, bony finger and touched my forehead. A jolt of energy coursed through my body, and a flood of memories washed over me. Memories I thought I had forgotten, memories of the fear, the terror, the endless nights spent hiding in my room, convinced he was just on the other side of the closet door. He was right. He was a part of me. He was the manifestation of all my hidden anxieties, my deepest insecurities, my most primal fears. And now he was here, taking form, claiming what he was owed. He leaned closer, his glowing eyes burning into mine. "Welcome to the fear room, Sarah. You're home now." The clock ticked forward. 3:34 a.m. The nightmare hour had just begun, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was just the beginning of my nightmare. The crooked man was here to stay, and he recognized me, the forgotten son. The therapist called it a coping mechanism. My insistence on having a brother, despite my parents' constant and unwavering denial, was, according to her, a way for my young self to deal with, well, she never quite finished that sentence. Deal with what? Loneliness? Isolation? An inherent lack of imagination? I remembered the drawings. Crayola-colored masterpieces featuring stick figures with jagged hair, locked in battles with crayon monsters, or climbing impossibly tall crayon trees. And in almost every single one, there was another figure, just like me but slightly taller with slightly darker hair. My parents would always smile, a strange sort of smile that never quite reached their eyes, and say, "You have such a vivid imagination, darling." Now, standing in the overgrown, neglected corner of the St. Augustine Cemetery, vivid imagination seemed a paltry explanation. The headstone was chipped and weathered, almost swallowed by ivy. I traced the inscription with a trembling finger. Thomas Ashton Riley, beloved son, 1988 to 1995. Below, a small, tarnished photograph was embedded in the stone. A boy, maybe 7 years old, smiled out at me. His hair was the same dark brown I vaguely remembered drawing. His eyes, filled with an infectious joy, mirrored my own. My last name, his face, my brother. A wave of nausea washed over me. My parents, they had lied. A lie so profound, so all-encompassing, it had rewritten my entire life. Why? What could warrant such deception? The cemetery was silent, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant drone of traffic. I sank to my knees, the damp earth seeping through my jeans. My mind raced, desperately trying to reconcile the reality before me with the fabricated one I'd always known. I rummaged through my backpack, pulling out the worn leather journal I carried everywhere. It was filled with sketches, memories, half-formed poems, and, of course, reproductions of those childhood drawings. I flipped through them, each image a hammer blow to my carefully constructed reality. There he was, always there. Suddenly, something else caught my eye, a drawing tucked away in the back, one I hadn't seen in years. It depicted me, maybe 5 years old, holding a kite, my brother beside me. And in the corner, scrawled in faded crayon, were the words, "Thomas is gone. Don't forget him." My blood ran cold. I did remember. A glimpse, a shadow, a feeling. Forgotten, but not entirely erased. The therapist was wrong. I wasn't coping. I was remembering. I had to know. I had to confront them. The drive home was a blur of anger and confusion. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the familiar facade of our perfectly manicured house felt like a cruel joke. My parents were in the living room, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. They looked up as I entered, their faces creasing into familiar smiles. "Darling, you're back early," my mother said, her voice a carefully crafted melody of warmth. "I went to St. Augustine Cemetery," I said, my voice tight. The smiles vanished. My father rose slowly, his face paling. What are you talking about?" my mother stammered, her hand fluttering to her throat. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Thomas Ashton Riley, 1988 to 1995. He's buried there. He's my brother." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's eyes welled with tears. My father stood frozen, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. We were trying to protect you. Protect me from what?" "The truth," I demanded, my anger finally breaking through. "From remembering my own brother?" The story that unfolded was agonizing. Thomas had been a happy, energetic child, full of life and laughter. He'd been everything I apparently wasn't. Then, at 7 years old, he was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. He fought bravely, but the disease eventually won. My parents, devastated by their loss, couldn't bear the thought of me growing up in the shadow of his memory. They convinced themselves and eventually tried to convince me that he never existed. They erased him from photographs, locked away his belongings, and forbade any mention of his name. "We thought it was the best thing for you," my mother sobbed, reaching out to me. "We thought it would save you from the pain, but it hadn't. It had robbed me of a brother, of a part of myself. It had built a wall of lies between us." I pulled away from her outstretched hand. "You didn't protect me," I said, my voice shaking. "You erased him. You erased us." I turned and walked out of the house, the weight of their lies pressing down on me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I needed to grieve. I needed to remember. I needed to find my brother again, even if it was just in my own heart. The forgotten son was no longer forgotten, and perhaps finally neither was I. The sentient forest. The last sliver of sun bled through the canopy, painting the forest floor in long skeletal shadows. My map, uselessly crumpled in my trembling hand, was as lost as I was. Days. It had been days since I'd ventured off the marked trail, lured by a flash of crimson I'd foolishly assumed was a rare bird. Now, the only bird song was a mocking chorus, echoing the terror clawing at my throat. The trees were wrong. Twisted, gnarled things that seemed to lean in, judging. Their branches, thick with moss that clung like grasping fingers, swayed with an unnatural rhythm, even when the wind was still. I'd caught a glimpse, out of the corner of my eye, of one shifting, rearranging its limbs. I dismissed it as exhaustion, as a hallucination, but the feeling persisted, a prickling unease that crawled beneath my skin. Hunger was a constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that amplified the forest's oppressive silence. Once, I'd found a patch of berries, plump and juicy, but something about their unnatural sweetness had made me hesitate. Instinct, I thought, or perhaps just the paranoia that had taken root in my soul. Then the feeling started, a subtle pressure on my ankle, like a gentle squeeze. I ignored it, attributing it to my worn boots, but it grew stronger, winding upwards around my calf, a silent, persistent caress. I pulled up my pants leg. That's when I saw them. Thin, hair-like roots, the color of dried blood, snaking around my skin. They pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickening organic glow. I clawed at them, tearing at the fragile tendrils, but they snapped off only to re-emerge, deeper, more insistent. Panic flared a white-hot fire that burned away all reason. I stumbled through the undergrowth, blindly crashing into trees, desperate to escape the encroaching tendrils. Each impact sent a jolt of pain through my body, but it was nothing compared to the horror of the roots burrowing deeper. They reached my knees, then my thighs. A strange, intoxicating warmth spread through my veins, a feeling of connection, of belonging. And then the whispers began. At first, they were just a low hum, a barely perceptible vibration beneath my skin. But they grew louder, clearer, weaving their way into my thoughts. "Join us," they murmured, the voice a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking branches. "Become part of the whole. Embrace the stillness." I fought them, fiercely clinging to the memory of my life before, the life I was losing. But the resistance was weakening. The roots pulsed, their song growing louder, more seductive. I could feel them reaching my heart, binding me to the forest with an invisible, unbreakable chain. I collapsed against a gnarled oak, its bark rough against my back. The roots had reached my chest, wrapping around my lungs, stealing my breath. My vision blurred, the world dissolving into a swirling kaleidoscope of green and brown. The whispers swelled, a tidal wave of voices promising peace, serenity, oblivion. "Join us," they chanted a hypnotic lullaby. "Let go, become the forest." And as the last sliver of my consciousness flickered and died, I heard a final, chilling thought, not whispered, but deeply, resonantly felt. "We have been waiting for you." The tree against my back seemed to sigh, a sound like the shifting of tectonic plates. The roots tightened their hold, drawing me into the earth, transforming me, atom by atom, into something new. The crimson leaves of the forest rustled, a silent celebration of another soul claimed. The trees moved, imperceptibly, shifting their positions, preparing to greet the next lost traveler. The forest was hungry, and it was patient. It would wait. It always waited. The hive. The honey was the color of sunset, a swirling amber caught in glass. Old Man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by the sun and a life lived amongst buzzing wings, had pressed it into my hands with a gnarled smile. "Best batch this year, son. clover and a touch of wildflower. Sweet dreams, sweet dreams. Irony dripped from the phrase like uncapped honey. My nights were anything but sweet since I'd started drizzling Hemlock's gift onto my toast. It started subtly, a low, insistent drone humming just beyond the edge of hearing as I drifted off. A sensation of movement on my skin, tiny legs tickling my arms and face. I'd wake with a jolt, convinced a stray fly had invaded my room, only to find silence and stillness. Then the dreams grew sharper, more vivid. Vast, hexagonal landscapes stretched before me, the precise geometry of honeycomb replicated on a titanic scale. I was small, insignificant, a speck amongst a teeming mass of chitinous bodies. They moved with a single, unified purpose, a silent, unwavering dedication to what? I never knew. I only knew I didn't belong. I was an intruder, an anomaly in their perfect, buzzing symphony. The insects in my dreams were not the familiar bees I saw flitting through Hemlock's fields. These were grotesque, distorted versions. Mandibles gnashed, compound eyes gleamed with a dark intelligence, and stingers, swollen and dripping, pulsed with venom. They moved with an unsettling grace, an almost hypnotic rhythm that both repelled and captivated. Each night, the dreams intensified, the buzzing grew louder, the sense of dread more profound. Sleep became a battleground, a horrifying immersion into a world I didn't understand and desperately wanted to escape. I stopped eating the honey. I threw the jar out, hoping to sever the connection. It didn't work. The swarm was still there, waiting for me in the darkness. Then came this morning. I woke with a strangled gasp, my throat burning, a thick, viscous liquid rising in my chest. I lurched out of bed, stumbling to the bathroom, and hacked violently into the sink. When the retching subsided, I stared in horror at what I'd expelled. Lying amongst the bile and phlegm was a single, lifeless queen. Her body, grotesquely distended, was a sickly, translucent yellow. Her wings, crumpled and broken, lay uselessly against her thorax. Her antennae, twitching slightly even in death, seemed to point accusingly at me. I stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold dread clamping down on my soul. How was this even possible? The buzzing had become a constant presence now, a low thrumming that resonated deep within my bones. I could feel it crawling under my skin, a phantom army marching through my veins. The hexagonal patterns seemed to imprint themselves onto my vision, distorting reality. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the core that the honey wasn't just honey. It was something else, something more. It was a catalyst, a gateway. Hemlock, with his knowing smile and sunburnt face, had given me more than just a jar of sweetener. He had given me a hive, and now the hive was growing inside me. I looked in the mirror and saw the faint glimmer of golden scales beginning to form on my neck. The queen was dead, but the colony needed a new one, and I apparently was being groomed for the role. The buzzing intensified. Somewhere, in the deepest recesses of my mind, I felt a single insistent command. Serve. The app that predicts death. The phone buzzed, the screen illuminating my face with a sickly green glow. Death timer. 2 minutes and 37 seconds. 2 minutes and 37 seconds. My breath hitched. 2 minutes and 37 seconds until what? Nothingness? Eternal oblivion? A fiery pit? Thanks to the stupid viral app, I was about to find out. I downloaded Death Timer on a lark, a morbid curiosity that had quickly spiraled into full-blown terror. It was supposed to be a joke, a way to scare your friends. But when the timer started counting down, not randomly, but relentlessly, I knew this was no joke. The first few days had been a blur of anxiety. I'd quit my job, maxed out my credit cards, and bought a ridiculously expensive sports car that I promptly crashed into a lamppost. Then the messages started. "We'll be there to watch." The first one had been anonymous, buried in my overflowing inbox. I dismissed it as spam, a cruel attempt to capitalize on the death timer craze. But they kept coming. Creepy, cryptic messages, always the same phrase, "We'll be there to watch." Death timer, 1 minute and 52 seconds. 1 minute and 52 seconds. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the reality of my impending doom. I was huddled in the corner of my apartment, the only light source my phone screen. Outside, the city thrummed with a life that I was about to leave behind. Another message. "We'll be there to watch." This time I replied, "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" No answer, just the taunting countdown on my phone screen. Death timer, 1 minute and 10 seconds. 1 minute and 10 seconds. I pulled myself to my feet, my legs shaky. I had to do something. Run? Hide? Fight? Who was I fighting? And what did they want? I stumbled to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street below was deserted, the only movement the flickering of a distant streetlight. But then I saw them, silhouettes, lurking in the shadows across the street. They were just standing there, unmoving, watching. A shiver ran down my spine. I slammed the curtain shut and backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. They were real. They were waiting. Death timer, 45 seconds. 45 seconds. I was trapped, helpless. Another message. "We'll be there to watch. Get ready." Panic clawed at my throat. I had to do something, anything. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy lamp on the bedside table, and held it above my head, ready to defend myself. Death timer, 20 seconds. 20 seconds. My vision blurred. My hands trembled. Then a knock on the door. A slow, deliberate knock that echoed through the silent apartment. Death timer, 10 seconds. 10 seconds. I held my breath, frozen in place. The door slowly creaked open. 5 seconds. Standing in the doorway were 5 figures, their faces obscured by the darkness. They didn't speak, didn't move. They just stood there watching. 1 second. 0. The phone screen went black. The apartment plunged into darkness. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. Nothing. I tentatively opened my eyes. The apartment was still dark, the figures still standing in the doorway. But something was different. The tension had dissipated. The air felt lighter. Then one of the figures stepped forward. "Happy birthday!" The lights flicked on. My friends and family erupted in cheers. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. Confusion washed over me. Birthday? What was going on? My best friend, Sarah, stepped forward, holding a cake with glowing candles. "Surprise! We knew about your birthday phobia, so we decided to prank you. We thought the Death Timer app would be a hilarious way to kick off your 30th. I stared at them, speechless. The Death Timer was a prank? The messages, the shadows, the impending doom. All staged? Slowly, the realization dawned on me. I had been played expertly and mercilessly. As I blew out the candles, a wave of relief, then anger, then something akin to hysteria washed over me. I had survived my death, but the experience had changed me. I had faced my mortality, albeit artificially, and come out on the other side. The Death Timer app might have been a joke, but the fear it had instilled in me was real. And that, I realized, was a lesson I wouldn't soon forget. Maybe, just maybe, I would even enjoy my birthday after all, just as soon as I recovered from the near heart attack, and after I planned a truly epic revenge on Sarah. The Harvest King. The goldenrod wept, burdened by the weight of the impending autumn. Every whisper of the cornfields sent a shiver down my spine. This year, the whispers are louder, clearer, sharper than ever. He's coming for his bride. They hissed in a chorus of dry, papery voices, and this year I was that bride. Each fall, the village of Oakhaven offered a sacrifice to the Harvest King. By lot, we would draw a stranger who had come to our village unsuspecting. This year, the name that was drawn, scratched on a brittle leaf of paper, was mine. Alara, daughter of Martha, weaver of dreams, and mender of nets. What was a hollow ache in my chest that tipped them into a cold juxtaposition to the vibrant colors of the harvest? Fear was always there, like a sticky thing clinging to the periphery of my mind. I tried to conjure the stranger, whose life had just been snuffed out among our cornfields, the remnants of his life nourishing us, the soil, and all I could see was my face, pale and drawn, reflected in the murky water of the wishing well. My mother, with red-rimmed, swollen eyes, held me. It's the custom, Alara, and this has been the case for centuries, to ensure a rich harvest, to please the king. I understood the tradition, the fear of the famine that could seize upon us should the king be angered. But that didn't make it okay, didn't make it bearable. Days bled into weeks, each sunrise an ominous countdown. All the while I wandered the fields, trying to understand the whispers, trying to escape. The cornstalks that used to comfort or feed them no longer did. Now they were nothing but prison bars. I would touch their scratchy leaves, responding with my questions. Why me? What does he want? The only answer was the rustling chorus. He's coming for his bride. The day of the harvest festival broke bright and clear, cruel jest of my desolation. The village was alive, the air thick with the scent of roasting delicacies and spiced cider. Laughter and music blared in the air, irritating my sore nerves. They took me to the edge of the cornfield, my hands tied with woven straw. The air was thick with expectation, the rustle of the corn loud in our ears. A hush fell over the crowd as Silas, the village elder, stepped forward. His expression was one of grim sadness, yet his eyes displayed a steely determination. For the fertility of the land, for the prosperity of Oakhaven, we offer this sacrifice to the Harvest King, he intoned, his voice carrying across the field. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for what was coming next. But then, another sound pierced the air, a low, rumbling growl. The earth shook under my feet. I opened my eyes. The cornfields were violently moving, like caught in a mad wind. The murmurs had shifted, swelling to a frantic scream. He's here. The king is here. Out of the cornfield depths came a figure. But it was not the wizened, spectral being I had imagined. It was a man, tall, brawny, with eyes the shade of burnt amber and hair like woven gold. With a crown of twisted vines and ripe berries, he was a vision of primal, earthbound, potent energy. He came to a stop in front of me, eyes intense, piercing. "You are Alara," he said, his voice a low, rumbling growl. My mind recoiled in fear, but my head nodded, shakily. He reached out, his calloused hands softly cradling my chin. The cornfields told me that you listened, that you questioned. Confusion warred with terror. I don't understand. He smiled, genuine warmth flashing in his eyes. The tradition, it is twisted, it is corrupted. It was supposed to be a joining, a partnership, not a sacrifice. His expression hardened as he gazed upon the frightened village folk. They have lost touch with the real meaning. Then he turned back to me, and his voice softened. I need a partner, Elara. Someone who knows about the land, who can help me care for it. Will you stay with me not as a sacrifice, but as my queen? Suddenly, the whispers in the cornfield changed as well, with a different kind of urgency. She's chosen. The queen is chosen. Looking into his amber eyes, I saw not death but life, not fear but a strange, nascent hope. I thought of the whispering cornfields, of tradition heavy upon the shoulders, of the fear that had kept Oakhaven under its thumb for so many years. And I made a decision. Yes, I whispered, in a voice so low as to barely be heard. Yes, I will. He grabbed my hand, sending a shock of energy through me. The corn stalks parted before us like a living curtain as we walked into the field. The villagers looked on, stunned, as we vanished into the heart of the harvest. The sacrifice was over. A new beginning had begun. The cornfields did not whisper fear but hope. The queen has come. Well, the king has found himself a bride, and the land will flourish. The bones circle. The air was thick and heavy, saturated with pine and wet soil. Sunlight flickered through the canopy, coloring dynamic mosaics on the forest floor. I tightened the strap of my backpack, the weight of my camera and lenses of familiar comfort. I was deep in the Redwood National Park, a place where I often found solace. But today, low-grade anxiety prickled at the nape of my neck. Silas, an old-timer at the ranger station whose beard looked like a tangle of Spanish moss, and whose eyes seemed steeped in centuries of stories, had warned me. Don't go into the bones circle, son, he'd rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering over asphalt. Some things are better left alone. Stones remember, and that one, it remembers hungry. I had, of course, written it off as local folklore, the sort intended to frighten tourists. I was a photographer, after all, attracted to the strange, the lost, and the stories of a ring of stones buried deep in the woods, away from the trails, had been too enticing to resist. It hadn't been easy to find. It had taken hours of bushwhacking, climbing over fallen logs, and slogging through fern-choked ravines to finally find it. The bone circle was not what I thought it would be. It was not a tidy, perfect circle of stones. Instead, it was a ramshackle series of moss-covered boulders standing on their ends, leaning against each other, most of them on their sides, creating a rough, ragged circle. At its center rested a solitary, bleached white bone, far too large to belong to a human being. There was an odd energy emanating from the spot, an impenetrable hum that reverberated in my chest. I told myself it was only the altitude or the fatigue, but I felt watched. But I took out my camera, my desire to capture this unknown place overcoming my discomfort. I tried capturing this object from different angles and lighting. It was too quiet, save for a distant bird call and the agitated pounding of my heart. As I bent down and brushed a clump of moss off one of the stones, an irresistible urge came over me. I reached out, grabbed the bone, and lifted it. It was strangely light, at once airy. I held it in my hands, feeling its odd, foreign texture. A wave of dizziness washed me, and the forest surrounding me warped and twisted. My first impulse was to replace the bone in the middle of the circle. A flood of intense guilt and trespass enveloped me. I packed up my gear, an urgent need to get out of this place taking control. Not crediting myself for what I'd found, I turned from the man and fled, backtracking quickly. Each hurried step made the sense of being watched worse. It started subtly, a twig snapping behind me, the sound of leaves rustling too nearby, too purposefully. Initially, I dismissed it as standard forest sounds, but then I noticed a pattern. Snap, pause, snap, pause. The snapping of twigs was close to rhythmic, perhaps even percussive, and the stillness between each snap felt like the rhythm of my own beating heart. Thump, thump, snap. A cold, viscous fear started to leak into my veins. I picked up my pace, but the snapping continued, relentless and steady. Thump, thump, snap. I began to run and branches smacked across my face and my lungs burned. Yet the snapping kept up, never missing a beat, perfectly in sync with my racing heart. Thump, 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 snap. I didn't dare look behind me. I didn't want to see what was making the sound, what had so intent on following me. All I knew was that it was there, hidden and not to be seen yet indisputably there, as if haunting me, also eerily corroborating the stupidity of my disrespect for Silas's warning. Thump, 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 snap. The sun started to set, coloring the sky orange and purple, and the sight brought no solace. The woods were getting darker, shadows pooled more deeply, and the snapping was nearer. Thump, 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 snap. I felt as though I could feel its breath on the nape of my neck. Now, curled up inside my tent, my headlamp casting a dim light on the nylon walls, I can still hear it. The snapping now is fainter, more distant, but it is still there, a constant, maddening reminder of my offense. Thump, thump, snap. I know it won't stop, not until I return the bone, but I'm terrified, frightened by what I would discover waiting there in that circle of rock, fearful of what I would release if I fuck with it again. But above all, I'm terrified of what will happen if I don't, because I know with a certainty that chills my marrow that whatever is following me, whatever is matching my heartbeat step for step, is going to catch up. Thump, thump, snap, and then the cadence will shift. The well of wishes. The town of Hollow Creek was falling into despair. The mill had closed, the youthful had gone to the cities, and what was left were the dour old-timers, stubbornly hanging onto a life that had washed away like a watercolor in a rainstorm. Then they rediscovered the well. It wasn't exactly hidden. It squatted moss-covered in the middle of the town square, a remnant of the time when Hollow Creek was just a creek, a watering stop for travelers. But it had been boarded up for decades and was considered unsafe. Old Man Hemlock, with his popping voice and eyes like polished stones, said his grandmother had once told him stories about wishes that came true if you tossed in a coin. So, with more hope than sense, they hacked away at the brick and called it the Well of Wishes. I was skeptical. I'd lived in Hollow Creek, not because I was loyal, but because I had no ambition. I worked at the dusty general store, as a cashier with aspirations too vibrant for the peeling wallpaper and the obtrusive whirring of the lottery machine. But even grumpy old me, cynical Lily, feigned a moment of hope as I gazed at the well, a rusty penny grasped in my sweaty little palm. The atmosphere surrounding it felt different, heavy almost. I could almost taste the damp earth and the silence that echoed in its depths. I shut my eyes, the words sticking in my throat. What did I truly want? Success? Travel? They felt out of place, without significance. I ultimately decided on the yearning I had felt since childhood. Love. I want love, I murmured, flinging the penny into the black chasm. It spiraled downward, a transient glimmer of optimism amid the blackness unable to be penetrated. The splash was barely heard. For several days, nothing occurred. Wishes granted or passed over, the stories rippled through the town. Mrs. Gable said her prize-winning pumpkin had grown overnight thanks to the well. Silas Johnson announced that he had won the lottery. Small print. He won $5. I chalked each of them up to coincidence or the collective delusion of a dying town. I then walked over to wash my hands. The sink in the back room of the general store was old, the porcelain cracked and chipped, the faucet prone to sputtering. I turned the handle and cold water gushed into the basin. I felt it while I was reaching for the soap, and I felt it. A firm, icy clutch around my ankle. I screamed, my body flapping backward and the soap slipping from my hands. I smashed into the counter, toppling a stack of canned peaches. There was nothing there though when I looked. Only the empty sink, the dripping faucet, the ghostly ring of my frozen fingers around my ankle. I told myself I had imagined it. I was overworked, stressed. I consumed too much weak tea that morning, but it kept happening. Every time I went near water, the shower, the lake from which Old Man Hemlock fished, even the bird bath outside my window, every time the same horrible feeling. A wet, bony hand gripping my ankle, dragging me deep into the twilight. The hand felt ancient, like the bones of something that had sat underwater for years, and it grasped with freshly desperate, unnatural strength. I tried to rationalize it. Parasite, a manifestation of my anxiety, but deep down I knew it was the well. My wish had gone so terribly, so horribly wrong. The more frequent it became, the more afraid I got. I avoided water at all costs. I gave up showering, which earned me dirty looks at the general store. I drank nothing but soda, my thirst a persistent, stinging itch. And finally, desperation led me to Old Man Hemlock. He sat and listened to my frantic story, his weathered face impassive. He didn't throw me out as I anticipated. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Well, it's not always nice at the well," he said, voice rasping. "The cost of a wish is higher than you think sometimes. What price? What am I supposed to do?" I cried, gasping while despair bubbled up inside me, like I was going to drown. His eyes were like two stone pieces as he gazed at me. Someone long ago wished there, before it was bricked up. A sailor, they say. He wished to return home, but he never made it. He drowned just offshore. My blood ran cold. "You mean the hand? It's his. He still wants to home Lily. And your wish for love, for somehow interlinked with love that all with his desperation, no? Hope, a dangerous thing in Hollow Creek, flickered in my chest. Can I undo it?" Hemlock considered this. "Maybe. You do have to return to the well. You need to withdraw your wish." The mere thought of getting closer to a body of water made me shudder. But I had no choice. I had no choice but to confront my fear and what awaited me in the depths of that dark well. That night I stood before the well of wishes under the pale moonlight. Felt tense, like there was a heavy force in the air. I sensed the sailor, a chill, clinging shadow at my feet. I inhaled deeply, my lungs aflame. I fished a coin out of my pocket, not a rusty penny this time, but a silver $50 that felt smooth and cold against my skin. "I take it back," I screamed, shattering the silence in the middle of the square. "I don't want love. I don't want anything. Just let him go." I tossed the coin into the blackness. For one thing, it made a bigger splash, was more resonant. A wave of chill air rushed through, so cold my breath left me. Then suddenly it disappeared too. What followed was a profound, absolute silence. I waited, quaking, for the thin hand to grasp my ankle, but it didn't come. I returned to the general store and washed my hands cautiously. Nothing. I showered tentatively, anticipating the usual terror. But it was only water cleansing and reviving. The sailor was gone. Hollow Creek wasn't suddenly revived. The mill stayed closed. The youths did not come back. But something had shifted. The burden of history had lightened, slightly. As for me, I still work at the general store. I still live in Hollow Creek. But I'm different now. I know that wishes flow like water, that they can be a gift and a curse, and that, at times, the biggest show of love is to release. Maybe someday, I'll even leave Hollow Creek myself. But for the moment, I am as glad to be free of ice grips and a sailor lost at sea. And I'll be far, far away from the well of wishes, the silent village. The dust of the forgotten coast clung to everything: my boots, my pack, the very air I breathed. I was an antiquarian, a scholar of forgotten languages and arcane rituals, and the village of Silencium, ghosted on the edge of the map, was a siren song I couldn't resist. The silence struck me first. Not just the absence of noise, but a heavy, palpable hush that pressed against my ears. The village lay nestled in a valley, a cluster of mud brick houses huddled around a central square. As I entered, figures emerged from the shadows, their faces blank and expectant. They wore simple, homespun clothes, their movements fluid and oddly graceful. I greeted them in the common tongue, then in a few local dialects I knew. Nothing. They merely stared, their eyes reflecting the dull gray sky. Finally, I tried a more archaic language, one I'd gleaned from a crumbling tablet in a forgotten temple. "Greetings, dwellers of Silencium. I seek knowledge. Can you help me?" One of the villagers, a woman with eyes as deep and black as a well, stepped forward. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, she reached into a pouch at her hip and pulled out a small slate. On it, meticulously drawn in chalk, was a single word: God. I frowned. "I understand. You worship a god. I am familiar with many gods. Which one guides your lives?" Again, the silent communication. This time, the woman pointed downwards, towards the central square. With growing unease, I followed her. The other villagers fell in behind us, a silent, watchful procession. We reached the heart of the village, and there it was, the source of the silence. In the center of the square stood a massive altar, crudely carved from a single block of obsidian. It oozed an unsettling feeling, a sense of wrongness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The stone was stained a deep, rust-colored brown. Blood, undoubtedly. And then I saw it. The altar wasn't just a random chunk of obsidian. It was carved with a face I recognized, a face that was undeniably, unequivocally my own. I burst out laughing. It was absurd, ludicrous. A primitive tribe, a silent village, worshipping an image of me. The arrogance, the sheer, unadulterated ego. I chuckled, shaking my head. "This is ridiculous. Do you think I'm a god? I'm just a I trailed off as the woman beside me reached out and gently touched my arm. Her eyes, usually so blank, now held a deep, sorrowful understanding. Slowly, I pieced it together. The silence, the abject devotion, the look in their eyes, a mixture of pity and reverence. The blood-stained altar, they had silenced themselves, cut out their tongues. To appease me, my laughter died in my throat. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a joke. This was a horrific, twisted reality. They believed I was a god, a deity demanding their silence, demanding what else? Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my amusement. If they believed I was a god, what would they do next? What price would they demand of me to maintain their silent, blood-soaked worship? As if in answer, the woman reached for another slate. This one contained a single chilling image, a stylized drawing of a tongue being removed. Underneath, in the same archaic script I'd spoken earlier, was a single, terrifying word: sacrifice. I knew then that I had stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I was no longer an antiquarian, a scholar seeking forgotten knowledge. I was a prisoner, a reluctant deity trapped in a silent, bloodthirsty village. And the altar, carved with my face, was a grim reminder of the price I would pay for their devotion. My daughter had died, replaced by a chilling, deafening silence that echoed louder than any scream. The silence of Silenium was no longer theirs. It was mine now, and I feared it would be the last thing I ever knew. The skin offering. The old woman's hut smelled of dying herbs and something else, something metallic and sharp, like blood drying on iron. I barely registered it then, too caught up in my desperation. Alara, they called her, and she was my last hope. My orchard was blighted, the trees weeping sap like tears, the fruit rotting before it ripened. A curse, child, Alara had croaked, her eyes, ancient and unsettling, fixed on me. A curse laid deep and spiteful. It will cost you to break it. I'd offered silver, land, and even the prize-winning bull I'd been grooming for the autumn fair. Alara had shaken her head, her knotted fingers drumming on a table littered with bones and feathers. Not coin, child, not land, a piece of you. I'd bristled. A finger, an eye, I'd almost fled. Then she chuckled, a sound like wind rattling through dry leaves. Foolish girl, just a lock of your hair, something connected to your essence, your spirit. Relief had washed over me, ridiculous in hindsight. A lock of hair, a small price to pay. Alara snipped it with rusty shears, muttering incantations I didn't understand, and promised the curse would be lifted by the next full moon. I left, lighter of heart, foolishly confident. The curse was lifted. My orchard bloomed anew, the trees heavy with fruit. But the relief was fleeting, replaced by a creeping horror that burrowed into my bones. It started subtly, a flicker at the edge of my vision when I looked in the mirror, a sense that my reflection wasn't quite synchronized. Then, one morning, I awoke before dawn and saw it. My reflection, normally a pale imitation of myself in the pre-dawn gloom, was shimmering, not like heat rising off asphalt, but like water rippling, distorting the image. I watched, paralyzed, as a fine, translucent film began to peel from my reflection's face. It was skin, my skin, or rather, a perfect, impossibly thin replica of it, sloughing off like a snake shedding its old scales. The peeling continued, down the neck, over the shoulders, until finally, my reflection stood there, slightly blurred, lacking the sharp definition of skin, and held out its hand. Resting in its palm was the shed skin, a perfect, ghostly death mask of my own features. I screamed. The sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, and the reflection vanished, leaving only the skin, cool and clammy, in my trembling hand. This had become my dawn ritual. Each morning, my reflection peels off its skin and offers it to me. I can't bring myself to touch it. It lies now in a small wooden box, the collection growing each day, a testament to some unspeakable pact made with Alara. Sleep has become a luxury. I dread the coming of dawn, the silent, agonizing process of the skin being offered. I've tried breaking the mirrors, smashing them into shards, thinking that would end it. But a new reflection appears the next morning, in the polished surface of a spoon, in the still water of a bucket, always waiting to perform its grim task. I don't understand. What was Alara really after? What curse did she truly lift, and at what cost? I tried visiting her hut again, but it was gone, as if it had never existed. Only the wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of dried blood. Now, I spend my days researching, poring over dusty tomes, seeking answers in forgotten lore. I've learned that hair is often used in binding rituals, connecting the giver to the receiver. Perhaps Alara didn't just lift a curse. Perhaps she forged a new one that binds me, not to the land, but to my own reflection. The real horror isn't the peeling skin. It's the knowledge that something vital, something intrinsically me, is being slowly drawn out, offered back in this grotesque parody of myself. I fear what will happen when there is nothing left to peel. What will my reflection become then? And what will become of me? Tonight, I'm gonna burn the skins. Every single one. Maybe fire will break the connection and sever the link. Maybe it will unleash something even worse. But I can't live like this, a prisoner in my skin, waiting for the dawn and the offering. I have to try. Perhaps, in the ashes, I will find not just the end of the horror, but also the last vestiges of the woman I once was before Alara, before the orchard bloomed again, before my reflection began to peel. Perhaps, in the silence that follows, I will finally be free. The drowned god, the incense smoke, thick and cloying, clung to the air around the lake. Fishermen, their faces etched with worry and supplication, lined the shore, tossing handfuls of rice and small, carved wooden fish into the water. They chanted prayers, their voices a low, mournful drone that vibrated against my skepticism. I scorned their reverence. Foolishness, I'd muttered, loud enough for old Silas to hear. Superstition. Do you think throwing trinkets into the water will guarantee a good catch? Skill and knowledge, that's what brings in the fish, not appeasing some drowned god. Silas, his eyes as deep and weathered as the lake itself, just shook his head. The lake gives, the lake takes, boy. Remember that. He then continued his ritual, dusting his forehead with ashes and murmuring something about respecting the ancient powers that dwelled beneath the surface. I laughed, a brash, arrogant sound that echoed over the placid water. I was young, strong, and sure of myself. I didn't need the favor of any mythical being to fill my nets. And for a time, I was right. My catches were bountiful, overflowing my boat with shimmering silver. I became known as the luckiest fisherman on the lake. The more success I had, the more I ridiculed the others' rituals, flaunting my good fortune. Then one day the luck turned. It started subtly. Fewer fish in my nets, tangled lines, a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air, even on the warmest days. I dismissed it, attributing it to bad weather and random chance. But the feeling of unease grew, a persistent prickling on the back of my neck. One particularly still and oppressive afternoon, I was alone on the lake. The water was unnaturally calm, a mirror reflecting the gray, overcast sky. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of my boat. I cast my net, and as it sank, I saw something shift in the murky depths. A flash of white, a fleeting glimpse of something human. Then the net snagged. I pulled, straining against the resistance. The boat rocked violently. Something tugged back with a strength that defied logic. I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my chest like I was being pulled from the inside. Panicked, I grabbed my knife and cut the line. The resistance vanished, and I stumbled backward, gasping for air. The boat spun, the water sloshing over the gunwales. I looked back at the spot where the net had been, and I saw it, a patch of seaweed, impossibly thick, swirling, and writhing in the water like animated hair. That night I dreamt of the lake. I dreamt of being pulled down, down into the cold, suffocating depths. I dreamt of a face, ancient and sorrowful, emerging from the darkness. A face framed by flowing seaweed, with eyes that held the secrets of the ages. I woke up choking, coughing up brackish water. My chest burned. My lungs felt heavy, filled with something thick and clinging. Now, weeks later, I lie in my bed, a prisoner of my own body. The doctors are baffled. They can't explain why seaweed is growing in my lungs, why the salty water constantly rises in my throat. They pump it out, but it always returns, as relentless as the tide. I can hear the lake calling me, a low, mournful song that vibrates through my bones. It whispers promises of peace, of belonging, of returning to the source. The water is my breath now, my blood. My skin feels slick and cold. I can smell the brine, the rotting fish, the ancient secrets that lie hidden in the depths. I understand now. Silas was right. The lake gives and the lake takes. And I, in my arrogance, failed to respect the power that dwelled within its depths. Now I am paying the price. Soon I will be gone. Soon the water will claim me completely. Soon I will be home. And as the seaweed tightens its grip around my heart, I can only pray that the drowned God will forgive my hubris and grant me a peaceful rest in his watery embrace. The rotting river. The town of Oakhaven had always been defined by the Silken River. It snaked through the valley, a shimmering ribbon of life that nourished their crops, powered their mills, and provided a playground for generations of children. But the Silken River was dying. It started subtly, a tarnish on the water's surface, a slight odor that clung to the air. Then the water began to darken, shifting from a vibrant blue to a menacing, oily black. Fish, once plentiful and vital to the town's economy, started writhing onto the banks, gasping for air that tasted like ash. Their silver scales dulled, their eyes glazed over with a deathly film. Fear gripped Oakhaven. The elders whispered of ancient curses and forgotten sins. The younger generation, armed with smartphones and a burgeoning sense of ecological awareness, blamed the nearby copper mine, accusing them of poisoning the river with their waste. But the most unsettling development, the one that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened skeptic, was the children. They started chanting. In the schoolyard, during recess, and even in their sleep, they would hum strange, melodic nursery rhymes. rhymes about a bone mother rising from the deep. Bone mother, from the river's bed. The children would sing, their voices eerily synchronized. Her fingers are long, her eyes are red. She stirs the silt, she wakes the dead. Bone mother, fear her tread. Old Martha, the town historian, recognized the rhyme. It was a fragmented remnant of a long-forgotten legend, a cautionary tale told to scare children away from the river centuries ago. The Bone Mother was said to be the spirit of a woman drowned in the river, her bones cursed to forever haunt its depths. Mayor Thompson, a pragmatic man more concerned with property values than folklore, dismissed the rhymes as childish fancy. He focused on finding a scientific explanation for the river's contamination. He sent probes into the water, gathered samples, and pored over scientific reports. The results were inconclusive. The water was undeniably polluted and filled with heavy metals and strange, unidentifiable compounds, but the source remained elusive. As the days turned into weeks, the situation worsened. The stench from the river became unbearable. The crops withered, the mills ground to a halt, and the once lively town square fell silent. People barricaded themselves in their homes, afraid of breathing the poisoned air or encountering a fish flopping desperately on the sidewalk. Young Alara, a fiery and rebellious teenager, refused to succumb to the despair. She remembered her grandmother, a woman who had a deep connection to the river. Alara remembered her saying that the silken river had a spirit, that it could feel pain and joy. Driven by desperate hope, Alara decided to follow the children's rhymes. She knew they were more than just childish nonsense. They were a key, a clue to unlocking the mystery of the rotting river. She started spending her days by the riverbank, listening to the children, observing their movements, and writing down every word of their chilling songs. One sweltering afternoon, she noticed a pattern. The children always gathered at the same spot on the riverbank, a place where the black water eddied in a slow, swirling vortex. As they sang, they would point to a specific point in the water just beneath the surface. Driven by a gut feeling, Alara waded into the putrid water. The stench was overwhelming, the water thick and slimy against her skin. Ignoring the revulsion that threatened to consume her, she plunged her hand into the vortex, feeling around in the murky depths. Her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, something bone-like. She pulled. The object was heavy, encrusted with river silt and covered in a slimy algae. With a grunt, she managed to drag it onto the bank. It was a skull, but not just any skull. This one was unnaturally long, the eye sockets deep and hollow, filled with a crimson residue. As the children saw it, they stopped singing, their eyes widening in a mixture of fear and recognition. "Bone Mother?" a little girl whispered, pointing a trembling finger. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The water in the silken river churned violently, the blackness deepening, swirling into a maelstrom. A guttural groan echoed through the air, and from the depths of the river, something began to rise. It was a figure, draped in river weed and shimmering with an unnatural luminescence. Its skeletal hand reached out, grasping for the skull Alara had retrieved. Its eyes, indeed red, burned with an ancient rage. Alara knew with a chilling certainty that the Bone Mother wasn't just a legend. She was a manifestation of the pain and suffering inflicted on the river. The years of pollution, the neglect, the disregard for its delicate ecosystem had finally taken its toll. This wasn't just about fixing the river. It was about appeasing the spirit that had been awakened. Acting on instinct, she grabbed the skull and held it out towards the rising figure. The Bone Mother paused, its burning gaze fixed on the skull in Alara's hand. Then, slowly, cautiously, it reached for it. As its bony fingers closed around the skull, the churning subsided. The groaning ceased. The red light faded from its eyes, replaced by a glimmer of something that resembled peace. The Bone Mother sank back into the river, disappearing into the inky depths. The silken river stilled, the black water slowly beginning to clear. The stench began to dissipate. Oakhaven was saved, but not without a cost. The encounter with the Bone Mother had left its mark. The town knew that they could no longer take the silken river for granted. The river needed to heal. Alara, hailed as a hero, became a tireless advocate for the river's restoration. She organized cleanup efforts, lobbied the copper mine to improve its waste management practices, and educated the children about the importance of respecting the environment. The Silken River never fully regained its former glory, but its waters gradually cleared. The fish slowly returned, and the children, though still remembering the chilling rhyme, began to sing new songs of hope and healing, songs of a future where the river and the town could once again live in harmony. The Bone Mother, silent and slumbering in the depths, served as a constant reminder of the price of neglect and the power of respect for the natural world. Oakhaven had learned a valuable lesson, a lesson etched in bones and whispered in the currents of the slowly reviving Silken River. The thing in the snow. The wind howled a mournful dirge, a constant companion in this desolate, snow-choked corner of the world. My cabin, a lonely sentinel against the white expanse, groaned under the assault. It wasn't just the wind, though. It was the weight, the tangible, oppressive weight pressing against the walls at night. Ever since the first big blizzard of the season, things had been different. The storms weren't just storms. They had a shape, something tall and jagged. I'd seen it out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting impression against the churning white. But the most unsettling thing was its pattern. It followed footprints. My footprints. I'd initially dismissed it as fatigue, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. But then came the first crack in the wall, a sharp, splintering sound in the dead of night. I'd examined it in the morning, a clean, straight split running down the sturdy pine. Couldn't have been the wind. The wind buffeted, it didn't cleave. Then another crack appeared, and another. Each one seemed to coincide with my trips outside to gather firewood, to check the traps. Each one grew larger with each passing storm. Fear, cold and sharp, began to seep into my bones. I started staying inside more, rationing supplies, telling myself the traps could wait. But the cabin felt like a cage, the silence amplifying the whispers of the wind, the creaks of the straining wood. One night, driven by hunger and desperation, I ventured out. The snow was crisp and unforgiving under my boots. I kept my gaze fixed on the path ahead, my axe held tight in my gloved hand. The air felt thick, charged with a silent menace. As I neared the tree-line, I heard it, a low groan, not of the wind, but of something immense shifting its weight. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dared to glance back. There, emerging from the swirling snow, was it. No longer a fleeting impression, but a stark, terrifying reality. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form a jagged silhouette against the white canvas. Its limbs were twisted branches of ice, its body a vortex of swirling snow and frost. And at the apex, where a head should be, was a swirling vortex of pure, blinding white. It was following my tracks. Panic seized me. I spun around and ran, the axe a clumsy weight in my hand. The groaning followed, growing louder, closer. I could feel its icy breath on my neck, the pressure of its immense weight pressing down on me. I stumbled, falling into the deep snow. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The thing was upon me, its icy branches reaching for me, the blinding white vortex swirling with malevolent energy. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, a thought, desperate and instinctive, clawed its way to the surface. It followed footprints I remembered. My footprints. I forced my eyes open and lunged towards the cabin, not following my previous tracks, but forging a new path through the untouched snow. I heard the groaning hesitate, a moment of confusion in its icy drone. I reached the cabin, fumbling with the latch, and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut. The thing slammed against the walls, the wood groaning in protest. But it paused again, confused by the sudden break in the trail. I knew I couldn't stay here. The cabin wouldn't hold forever. But I had bought myself time. Time to think. Time to find a way to break the connection. Looking around the cramped space, my eyes landed on the fire pit. An idea, fragile and desperate, began to form. That night, I stoked the fire high, feeding it every scrap of wood I could find. I watched the flames lick at the chimney, sending plumes of smoke into the swirling blizzard. Then, I grabbed the shovel and began to erase my tracks. I meticulously filled in every footprint leading away from the cabin, smoothing the snow until it was a blank canvas. The cabin shuddered. The thing was still there, circling, waiting, but it was hesitant, its movements less assured. Finally, as the last of my footprints vanished, I went outside, armed only with the shovel. I walked a short distance away from the cabin and then started carving a new path. But this time, I didn't walk in a straight line. I created a labyrinth of crisscrossing tracks, overlapping and confusing, leading nowhere and everywhere. I wanted to break its connection, to shatter its ability to follow. Then, exhausted and freezing, I returned to the cabin, carefully erasing the final track that led to the door. The night passed in agonizing slowness. The thing remained, its icy presence palpable outside the walls. But the pressure was less intense, the groaning less certain. When dawn finally broke, painting the snow a pale, ethereal gray, I cautiously opened the door. The thing was gone. The snow was pristine, unmarked except for the chaotic labyrinth I had created. Had I succeeded? Or was it simply waiting, biding its time? I don't know. I still hear the wind howl, and the cabin still creaks. But the weight is gone. For now, I've learned to read the snow, to see the subtle shifts in the wind, and to anticipate the shape of the coming storms. And I vowed never to leave a single unbroken trail again. Because out here in this desolate wilderness, the blizzards have a shape, and that shape remembers. And it waits. The carnivorous cave. The whispers started a month ago and carried on the wind with the scent of pine and dread. Explorers, seasoned veterans of 100 mountain ranges, vanishing into black maw caverns like shadows swallowed by the dark. The locals, gnarly folk hardened by the unforgiving slopes, muttered about old gods and hungry earth, their eyes wide with a fear I usually only saw in cornered wolves. I scoffed at the superstitions, of course. I was Arthur Finch, a man of science, a cartographer driven by logic, and a thirst for the unknown. Loss was a tragedy, yes, but solvable with careful observation and a methodical approach. So, armed with my compass, notebook, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I found myself at the mouth of Blackman Caverns, the granite teeth of the mountain snapping shut around a gaping maw of black. The air immediately chilled, a clammy breath that raised goosebumps on my arms despite the bright summer sun. I switched on my headlamp, the beam cutting through the oppressive dark, and stepped inside. The first few meters were unremarkable. Damp stone, trickling water, the earthy smell of damp decay. Then the temperature began to rise. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was as if I'd walked through an invisible curtain into a humid, stifling heat. The rock underfoot grew strangely warm, almost alive. I frowned, pulling out my thermometer. The air temperature was normal for a cave, but the ground registered a disconcerting 35 degrees Celsius. Something was wrong. I ventured deeper, the beam of my headlamp dancing across the uneven walls. The air grew thicker and heavier, and a strange, metallic tang filled my nostrils. Then I saw it, dripping, not water, but something viscous and clear, clinging to the tips of the stalactites like glistening tears. I cautiously reached out a gloved hand and cupped it beneath a drop. The liquid landed with a soft plink, and I raised my hand to my nose. The stench hit me like a physical blow. It was the acrid, bile-laced odor of stomach acid, amplified 1,000-fold. My stomach churned, and I fought back the urge to vomit. This wasn't natural. This wasn't a mere geological phenomenon. The walls were no longer cold and damp. They were fleshy. The stone had taken on a pinkish hue, crisscrossed with what looked like veins, pulsating faintly in the flickering lamplight. The stalactites, too, were no longer mere rock formations. They were organic, resembling elongated tongues, constantly dripping their corrosive essence. Panic began to claw at the edges of my carefully constructed composure. My rational mind struggled to process what my senses were telling me. This wasn't a cave. It was a living organism, a colossal, subterranean creature, and I was standing inside its gullet. I tried to retrace my steps, but the familiar landmarks had shifted and distorted. The passage I thought I had entered was narrower, the walls closing in with a disconcerting slowness. The pinkish flesh pulsed more violently now, the veins throbbing with a disturbing rhythm. Then I saw it, a skeletal hand, picked clean, protruding from a crevice in the wall. A tarnished brass compass lay nearby, identical to mine. The blood drained from my face. One of the vanished explorers. The whispers in the wind hadn't been superstitions. They were warnings. A low rumble echoed through the caverns, originating deep within the bowels of the earth. The dripping intensified, the acidic rain stinging my skin through my protective gear. The walls began to constrict, a slow, agonizing squeeze that promised a fate far worse than death. I knew then that logical observation and methodical approach were useless. I was trapped in the belly of the beast, a digestive system of unimaginable proportions. My only hope was to escape before the cavern decided it was time for its next meal. I began to run, my headlamp beam cutting a desperate swathe through the encroaching darkness. The stomach acid burned, the pulsating flesh pressed in, and the rumbling grew louder and closer. I ran, fueled by a primal terror, towards the faint glimmer of light in the far distance, praying that the mouth of the beast was still, somehow within reach. Whether I make it out, I cannot say. I can only hope that this recording, should it ever be found, serves as a warning. Some darknesses are best left unexplored. Some secrets are best left buried. Some caves are best left hungry. The tide of teeth. The air hung thick and salty, heavy with the smell of brine and something else, something metallic and sharp. I ran a calloused hand over the rough-hewn planks of the Serafina, my little fishing boat, and stared out at the unnaturally calm ocean. Last night, the tide had gifted us a horror. 1,000,000 teeth, maybe more, jagged and ivory, littered the beach. They crunched underfoot, a disconcerting percussion accompanying the morning's usual symphony of gulls. Now, further out, where the ocean shimmered in oily black, something huge circled. I could feel it more than see it, a subtle pressure in the air, a vibration in the hull of the Serafina. My radar was useless, just spitting static. The fish finder, usually a tapestry of squiggles indicating a healthy haul, was blank. Emptiness. I tried the radio again, my knuckles white against the cold metal. Static. Nothing but static. A howling void mimicking the one growing in my gut. Then, a crackle, sharp and unexpected. A voice, faint and breathy, barely audible above the hiss. Serafina, Serafina, do you copy? This is the Serafina, I copy. Who is this? My heart leaped, a fragile bird taking flight in a cage of dread. The voice was ragged, laced with a terror so palpable it physically shook me. Get out now. It's feeding. The voice cut out, swallowed by static, leaving only the chilling echo of its final word. Feeding. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. The teeth, the silence, the circling. They painted a horrifying picture I'd rather not visualize. My mind conjured images of ancient leviathans, creatures out of mythology, beings that slumbered in the crushing depths until the ocean offered them a banquet. Panic clawed at my throat, choking off reason. I fumbled with the ignition, my hands slick with sweat. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I cursed, slamming my fist against the dashboard. Useless. I was a sitting duck. Below, the churning water grew closer. The Serafina rocked violently, the waves not quite waves, but rather the displacement of a monumental mass beneath. I scrambled for the harpoon gun, my fingers clumsy and trembling as I loaded a shaft. A futile gesture, but it was all I had. The ocean erupted. Not a single wave, but a geyser of water, flesh, and teeth. Hundreds, thousands of them, caught in the frothing spray, sparkling like deadly diamonds. The air filled with the stench of rot and something older, something primal and terrifying. I saw it then, a glimpse, a sliver of scale bigger than my boat, a monstrous the size of a dinner plate, black and cold and utterly indifferent. It circled, slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. I could feel the heat radiating from its colossal form, the sheer power of a creature that dwarfed everything I knew. This wasn't just a fish, it was a living earthquake, a force of nature. I raised the harpoon, aiming for the monstrous eye. Pointless act, I knew, but I had to do something. As I squeezed the trigger, a wave of despair washed over me, a realization that this was the end, that I was nothing more than a tiny, insignificant morsel for a being beyond my comprehension. Then silence. The circling stopped. The stench faded. The waves calmed. I stood there, shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins, the harpoon gun limp in my hand. Had it gone? Had it decided I wasn't worth the effort? A new sound reached my ears, a low, guttural rumble that echoed from the depths. a sound that vibrated through my bones, a sound of primal satisfaction. Then, from the depths, a single word bubbled to the surface, carried on the oily sheen of the water. A word that was both a sigh and a threat, a promise and a warning. More. The fungus among us. The damp earth smell had always been there, a musty undertone to my basement's general gloom. But this was different. This was concentrated, overpowering. I descended the creaky wooden steps, flashlight beam trembling in my grip, and choked. The air was thick with a cloying sweetness, like rotting fruit and damp moss. Then I saw them, clustered near the water heater, pulsing with an eerie internal light, were hundreds, maybe thousands of mushrooms. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, each one a small, luminescent parasol, radiating a soft, ethereal glow. The caps were a milky white, veined with shimmering blue lines that pulsed rhythmically and delicate. Fern-like gills dripped with a viscous, phosphorescent fluid. I took a step closer, mesmerized. The air shimmered around them, a heat haze visible only in the light of the flashlight. I instinctively recoiled, a primal fear gripping me. They were beautiful, terrifying, and wrong. Ignoring the warning bells screaming in my head, I knelt down, extending a gloved hand toward one of the larger mushrooms. As my fingers brushed the cool, slick surface, a puff of spores erupted, swirling around me like a ghostly mist. I coughed, pulling back, a metallic taste coating my tongue. The air grew thick and heavy with the sweet, rotting scent. I shouldn't have inhaled them. I stumbled back upstairs, my head swimming. The mundane normalcy of my living room felt jarring after the otherworldly spectacle below. I chalked it up to the basement, the dampness, and the general creepiness. I promised myself I'd call someone tomorrow to, well, I wasn't sure what. An exterminator? A mycologist? A priest? Later that evening, as I was preparing dinner, I glanced out the kitchen window towards Mrs. Henderson's meticulously manicured lawn across the street. She was tending to her prize-winning roses, her back bent at an unnatural angle. I squinted, trying to get a better look. Then I saw it. Mrs. Henderson had pulled off one of her own fingers. Calmly, clinically, she popped it into her mouth and chewed. Her eyes, usually bright and cheerful, were vacant, glazed over. She swallowed, a faint trace of blood glistening on her chin, and reached for another rose. I gasped, stumbling backward. I gripped the counter, heart hammering in my chest. This couldn't be real. This had to be. I rubbed my eyes frantically. When I looked again, Mrs. Henderson was gone, and the roses stood untouched, swaying gently in the evening breeze. A wave of nausea washed over me. Exhaustion, I told myself. It was just exhaustion. But the next day was worse. As I was leaving for work, I saw Mr. Davies, the perpetually grumpy old man next door, gnawing on his own arm. His face was blank, devoid of emotion. He didn't even seem to notice the blood. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Mr. Davies was simply standing there, watering his lawn, looking as perpetually grumpy as ever. Panic started to claw at my throat. I knew what was happening. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the spores. The glowing, fungal spores in my basement were poisoning me, twisting my perception, showing me this. I slammed the door shut and ran back inside. I had to get rid of them. Now, armed with a shovel and a garbage bag, I descended into the darkness once more. The mushrooms pulsed with an even brighter, malevolent glow. The sweet stench was almost unbearable. As I began to hack away at the luminous fungi, their glow intensified, bathing the basement in an unearthly light. The spores swirled around me, thick and suffocating. This time I couldn't ignore the visions. My hands, the hands holding the shovel, were turning translucent, the bone beneath visible. The shovel warped and twisted, becoming a writhing mass of flesh. I screamed, dropping the shovel and staggering back. The basement walls seemed to breathe, pulsating in time with the mushrooms. The air crackled with unseen energy. Then I saw them, moving in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the flashlight. My neighbors, Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Davies, others I didn't recognize. Their eyes were vacant, their faces smeared with blood. They were moving towards me, their limbs twitching, their mouths open in silent, hungry screams. I knew what they wanted. I knew what the mushrooms were showing them. Me. I scrambled back up the stairs, each step a desperate plea for sanity. The visions intensified, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. I slammed and bolted the basement door, knowing it wouldn't hold them. I was trapped in my own house with the fungus among us and the monstrous hunger it had unleashed. I looked out the window at the ordinary world outside, at the innocent people who were still safe, for now. And I knew I had to destroy them, all of them, even myself if necessary. Because if I didn't, the spores would spread, the visions would spread, and soon everyone would be eating themselves alive. The blood blossoms. The massacre at Oakhaven was swift, brutal, and thorough. Bandits, some said, others a rival lord testing boundaries. Whatever the cause, when the smoke cleared, every man, woman, and child lay still amongst the charred timbers and shattered stone. The soil drank deep that day, a feast of crimson. Then the flowers. They sprang up overnight, a riot of color amongst the desolation. Blossoms the shade of arterial blood, with petals that unfurled like supplicating hands. They were beautiful, undeniably so, in a way that pricked at the conscience. Beauty born from such ugliness felt obscene. Even the birds kept their distance. The smell, however, was what kept most people away. Not of sweet nectar and sun-warmed earth, but of raw copper, of freshly turned blood and iron. It was a primal scent, a scent of death and fear that clung to the back of the throat and soured the breath. Old Martha, the village herbalist from the next valley over, was the first to brave Oakhaven. Driven by morbid curiosity and the persistent rumors, she tentatively stepped into the ghost town. The metallic reek almost knocked her back. She cautiously approached a cluster of blood blossoms, their crimson heads bobbing gently in the silent breeze. They were unlike anything she had ever seen. Their stems were thorny, almost barbed, and the petals felt unnervingly smooth, like polished bone. A foolish idea, a test of courage, bloomed in her mind. She reached for the largest blossom, her fingers trembling. Just one, she whispered to the silent ruins, just to study, to understand. As her fingers closed around the stem, the ground screamed. It wasn't a human scream, not exactly. It was a composite sound, a chorus of agony rising from the earth itself. 1,000 voices, men's baritone roars choked with blood, women's piercing cries for mercy, children's terrified whines. The sound clawed at her ears, vibrated through her bones, and threatened to shatter her sanity. Martha recoiled, stumbling backward, her hands flying to her ears. The scream faded, leaving a ringing silence and a terror that clung to her like icy dew. The blossom, untouched, swayed innocently in the breeze. She fled Oakhaven, her mind reeling, the sound of the scream echoing in her nightmares. She told her story, but few believed her. Old woman's ramblings, they said, grief and shock playing tricks. Yet, the story spread. A whispered warning passed from traveler to traveler. Oakhaven became a place to avoid, a scar on the landscape. One day, a young soldier, a boy really named Thomas, was sent to patrol the outskirts of the Baron's territory. He'd heard the tales of Oakhaven and dismissed them as folklore. He was a soldier, hardened and brave, not a superstitious villager. He came across the ruins accidentally, drawn in by the unsettling beauty of the flowers. The metallic smell was strong, but he ignored it. He saw only the vivid crimson, a splash of defiant life in the heart of destruction. He wanted to take a flower, a memento, perhaps, of his courage, a trophy of his disbelief. He wanted to prove the stories wrong. He reached for one, a perfect specimen radiating an almost hypnotic crimson glow. He hesitated. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with an unspoken warning. He shook his head, dismissing his unease. He was a soldier, damn it. His fingers closed around the stem. The earth screamed, but Thomas didn't recoil. He grit his teeth, his youthful bravado crumbling at the edges. He held on, determined to defy the sound, to conquer the fear. He pulled harder. The blossom snapped, and the screaming intensified. It rose in pitch and volume, a cacophony of anguish so profound it threatened to tear the world apart. But something else happened. As the flower came free, a single word, clear and sharp, pierced through the chaotic noise: justice. Then another, remember, and another, avenge. Thomas stared at the blood blossom in his hand, his face pale with terror and dawning understanding. The screams were not just screams of pain, but pleas for justice. The flowers, they were the voices of the dead. He dropped the blossom as if it were burning him. The screaming subsided, leaving a deep, echoing silence. He looked at the ruins, at the crimson blossoms swaying in the breeze, and finally understood. Oakhaven was not cursed. It was demanding. The blood blossoms were not a sign of death, but a call to action. Thomas, the young soldier who dismissed the stories as folklore, now knew the truth. He had heard the screams. He had held the voice of the dead in his hand. He left Oakhaven, not in fear, but with a heavy heart and a newfound purpose. He would not let the massacre be forgotten. He would find the perpetrators, and he would bring them to justice. The blood blossoms bloomed in Oakhaven, a constant reminder of the atrocity, a silent scream waiting to be heard. And Thomas, the reluctant avenger, would make sure that the scream was finally answered. And there we vanish into the static of the storm. If you're still here, congratulations. You've survived this chapter of the night. But the void is patient. Ring the bell so the next horror never catches you unprepared. Tell us below, which story clawed deepest into your fears? Share this video with someone who claims they've seen it all. Then watch their bravado unravel. Until our next haunting, keep one eye on the shadows. The rain remembers your name,